Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. May we request everyone to please settle down? We're about to start the program. Before we start, for some house rules, may we request everyone to put their cell phones in silent mode, please? May we now request everyone to stand up for the Philippine National Anthem. We may now take our seats. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the Manila Defense Symposium, organized by Trident Defense. I'm your host this afternoon, Attorney Jose Adolfo Cruz, also a Lieutenant Commander in the Philippine Navy. We are fortunate enough to have in attendance our guest of honor, Justice Antonio Carpio of the Supreme Court of the Philippines, Senator Juan Ponce Enrile, His Excellency David Strachan, Ambassador from New Zealand, Ambassador Albert Del Rosario, former Secretary of Foreign Affairs, the Honorable Rodante Marcoleta, Representative Juan Sigip, and also from government and from the military, other members of the diplomatic community, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, military allies, the Philippine Coast Guard, the Philippine National Police, the private sector, academic institutions such as law schools, and we have the youth sector, the Lourdes School of Quezon City, and their teachers, members of the media, office from the SAJATC, the SFP Law, and Trident Defense. At this point, we would like to call on the Chairman and CEO of Trident Defense, Captain Rodrigo C. Mejia IV, Master in National Security Administration, to render the opening remarks.
A very good, a very good afternoon to all. It is with great honor that I welcome our guest lecturer, the Honorable Antonio T. Carpio, Senior Associate Justice of the Supreme Court, foreign diplomats, the Department of National Defense, the Department of Foreign Affairs, headed by Secretary Del Rosario, who is here right now, the Armed Forces of the Philippines, Integrated Bar of the Philippines, the Academe, distinguished guests, and every attendee here to the second annual Trident Defense and Security Symposium. Trident Defense is a think tank group that advances study in the field of international security and geostrategy. It addresses strategic issues and threats from US, China, Japan, the Korean Peninsula, and the Asia-Pacific region. It discusses and analyzes defense strategies in our area of responsibility. Its mission is to inculcate wise strategic thinking among leaders involved in the defense policy-making process. Its vision is the realization of these policies in the pursuance of regional peace and hopefully eventual world peace. The strategic challenge that confronts us most today is the uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity, and volatility impinging on national security. National security is a complex domain that remains a key concern to countries worldwide. These challenges can complicate key decisions and turn the tide into a horizon of pessimism and global insecurity. One of the significant strategic challenges that I see in the next 2 years is the volatile conflict in the South China Sea, Spratly Island. These challenges represent a clear and present danger rule. If not checked and managed properly, this conflict should be resolved in a multilateral or bilateral way so that confrontation between two or more states would be avoided. This will be discussed by Justice Carpio in this lecture. It is through this symposium and forums like the Trident Defense that allow us to analyze, debate, devise, or debunk certain defense strategies that do not in any way promote fairness, righteousness, and global responsibility. As chairman of the board, I thank you all for your attendance. This important event would not be possible without your presence. I leave to you a motto here. It's in unitate vis est, meaning to say, in unity there's strength. Thank you.
Before we proceed to the introduction of our guest of honor and speaker, allow me to acknowledge a good friend who has been giving a valuable contribution in the preparation and execution of this event. His name is Mr. Lujan Alipio. He is a self-professed justice leaguer, an advocate of judicial reform and independence, an active participant in public forum and lectures on the improvement of the Philippine justice system. A lawyer who puts his country first is what he aspires to be. Mr. Alipio, Lujan, thank you very much. And now, for my more pleasant task. Born in Davao City, Philippines, Justice Antonio T. Carpio was sworn in as a member of the Supreme Court on October 26, 2001. Justice Carpio obtained his law degree from the College of Law of the University of the Philippines, where he graduated valedictorian and cum laude in 1975. He placed sixth in the 1975 bar examinations. He earned his undergraduate degree in economics from the Ateneo de Manila University in 1970. In his student days, Justice Carpio was chairman of the editorial board of the Philippine Law Journal of the UP College of Law. He was editor-in-chief of the Gidon, the school paper of the Ateneo de Manila University. He also served as managing editor of the Philippine Collegian, the school paper of the University of the Philippines. Fresh out of law school, Justice Carpio went into private practice and founded the Carpio, Villaraza, and Cruz law firm. He was a professorial lecturer of the UP College of Law from 1983 until 1992, when he was appointed Chief Presidential Legal Counsel of the Office of the President of the Republic of the Philippines. Justice Carpio was a member of the Board of Regents of the University of the Philippines from 1993 to 1998. He was a member of the Technology Transfer Board of the Department of Industry from 1978 to 1979. He served as special representative of the Department of Trade for textile negotiations from 1980 to 1981. He was elected president of the Integrated Bar of the Philippines, Pasay Makati Chapter in 1985 to 1986, director of the UP Law Alumni Association from 1984 to 1989, and director of the Philippine Bar Association from 1989 to 1990. For his distinguished and exemplary service to the Republic, Justice Carpio was awarded in 1998 the Presidential Medal of Merit by then President Fidel Ramos. In 1991, Justice Carpio received the Outstanding Achievement Award in Law from the Ateneo Manila University Alumni Association. In 2002, he was also the recipient of the Distinguished Alumnus Award from the Ateneo de Davao Alumni Association. In 2009, he was conferred a Doctorate of Laws honoris causa by the Ateneo de Davao University. Justice Carpio is the chair of the Second Division and the chair of the Senate Electoral Tribunal. Ladies and gentlemen, without any further ado, may I have the honor to present to you Justice Antonio Carpio.
Thank you for that kind introduction. A pleasant afternoon to everyone. I wish to thank Trident Defense for organizing this forum and for inviting me to give this presentation this afternoon. I wish to thank everyone present here for attending this forum. If you look at the screen, it says South China Sea, West Philippine Sea dispute. The West Philippine Sea is only a part of the bigger sea, the South China Sea. The West Philippine Sea refers to the territorial sea, exclusive economic zone, and extended continental shelf of the Philippines. The dispute covers almost the entire South China Sea. What is at stake for the Philippines in the dispute in the West Philippine Sea? At stake is 80% of the Philippines' exclusive economic zone, comprising 381,000 square kilometers of maritime space, and 100% of the Philippines' extended continental shelf, estimated at over 150,000 square kilometers of maritime space, aggregating a huge maritime area of over 531,000 square kilometers, larger than the total land area of the Philippines of 300,000 square kilometers. Either the Philippines keeps this huge maritime space or loses it to China. That's the area in dispute. This is our exclusive economic zone, our extended continental shelf. This area is larger than the total land area of the Philippines. This is the gravest external threat to the Philippines since World War II. The root cause of the South China Sea dispute is, of course, China's 9 dash lines claim, which gobbles up large areas of the EEZs and extended continental shelves of the Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. These are the 9 dash lines claim of China. These are the exclusive economic zone of the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, Malaysia again, Indonesia, and Vietnam. And the 9 dash lines eat up all of that, about 85.7% of the South China Sea. China claims everything within, all the waters, all the islands, rocks, mineral resources, fish, oil and gas. China claims all of them. China submitted this map, the 9 dash lines map, to the United Nations last 2009. It was the first time that China submitted to the world community this map. China did not explain the legal basis for the dashes. The dashes had no fixed coordinate. The Philippines, Vietnam, Malaysia, and Indonesia promptly protested. And this map was attached to a note verbal of China. And that note verbal says China has indisputable sovereignty over the islands in the South China Sea and the adjacent waters, and enjoys sovereign rights and jurisdiction over the relevant waters as well as the seabed and subsoil. Now, the terms adjacent and relevant waters are not terms of UNCLOS. We asked China to explain the meaning of these terms. China has refused. We asked China to explain the meaning of the 9 dash lines. China has refused. So we have to divine the meaning of these words, the meaning of the 9 dash lines, by examining China's acts, regulations, declarations, and practices in the South China Sea. So let's go to those acts. In 1988, China seized Subi Reef from the Philippines. Subi Reef is located outside our EEZ, but within our extended continental shelf. Now, Subi Reef is a low tide elevation. At low tide, you see it protrude above the surface of the water, but at high tide, it's totally submerged. You don't see it at high tide. That's a low tide elevation. Under international law, a low tide elevation belongs to the adjacent coastal state. Only the adjacent coastal state can exploit the natural resources found within that low tide elevation. Only the adjacent coastal state can put up artificial islands or structures. China just ignored that. Of course, the adjacent coastal state is the Philippines. Now, in 1995, China seized Mischief Reef from the Philippines. Mischief Reef is another low tide elevation located deep within our EEZ, about 125 nautical miles from Palawan. Again, under UNCLOS, it's only the Philippines that can put up an artificial island there. It's only the Philippines that can exploit its natural resources, living and non-living. China just ignored that. China seized that in 1995. That's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. China claims all of this. In 2010, the Philippines awarded a service contract to Sterling Energy. That's the predecessor of Forum Energy. This is the service contract area. China protested, sending a note verbal to the Philippines on 22 February 2010, expressing its strong objection and indignation and asserting indisputable sovereignty sovereign rights and jurisdiction over the Spratlys and its adjacent waters. China demanded that the Philippines withdraw the service contract immediately. China sent another note verbal on 13 May 2010, again demanding that the Philippines immediately withdraw the decision to award the service contract to Sterling Energy. Now this block here is only 85 nautical miles from Palawan within our EEZ, and that is 595 nautical miles from Hainan. Now, this area here is fully submerged. It's not even a low tide elevation, it's fully submerged. But China says under the 9 dash lines, we own this area here, in the same manner that we own Subi Reef and Mischief Reef. That's the meaning of 9 dash lines. On 2nd of August 2010, the Nido Petroleum Office in Manila received an email from the Chinese Embassy in Manila requesting for a meeting. That meeting was held on 6 August of 2010, and in that meeting, the Chinese Embassy official showed the Nido official a map of the 9 dash line and told the Nido officials, you are exploring this area that belongs to China, you get out of this area. Of course, that scared Nido Petroleum officials, and they never explored that area again. China claims this area under the 9 dash lines. That's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. In 2011, the Philippines put out a bid, international bid, for areas 3 and 4 in the Reed Bank. It's well within our EEZ. On July 4, 2011, China protested and sent a note verbal to the Philippines stating the Chinese government urges the Philippine side to immediately withdraw the bidding offer in areas 3 and 4, refrain from any action that infringes on China's sovereignty and sovereign rights. In other words, under the 9 dash lines, China claims sovereignty and sovereign rights over areas 3 and 4, well within our EEZ. It's a totally submerged area. There are no low tide elevations there. That's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. In March of 2011, this vessel commissioned by the Philippines to undertake surveying here, the MV Veritas Voyager, was harassed by 2 Chinese Coast Guard vessels, so it stopped surveying the Reed Bank. Now, our problem is that this is Malampaya here. The 9 dash lines cut through Malampaya. Malampaya is our largest operating gas field in the Philippines. It supplies 40% of the energy requirement of Luzon. Malampaya will run out of gas in 10 years. So we have to develop Reed Bank as a substitute, as a replacement for Malampaya, but we cannot develop the Reed Bank because the Chinese Coast Guard vessels harass our survey ships. So we have a big problem, and we will have rotating brownouts if we cannot develop Reed Bank. In 2012, China published this map internationally. It is called Location for Part of Open Blocks in Waters Under the Jurisdiction of the People's Republic of China, available for foreign cooperation in 2012. These are the blocks being bidded out by China. This happens to be, here is Hainan, this is Vietnam, that's Palawan, and these blocks are within the EEZ of Vietnam, within the extended continental shelf of Vietnam. But China, under the 9 dash lines, claims ownership of the waters here. That's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. In 2013, China published a new map of China. China added a 10th dash on the eastern side of Taiwan, and China called the dashes its national boundaries. Now, that's a very significant term because what is enclosed by your national boundaries constitute your national territory. So we had to protest. So on June 7, 2013, we sent a note verbal to China saying the Philippines strongly objects to the indication that the 9 dash lines are China's national boundaries in the West Philippine Sea, South China Sea. We had to protest that one. And if you look at the map, this is the map that China published in 2013. The 10th dash was added here on the eastern side of Taiwan. And if you look at the legend of the map, this is the shading that you find here on the 9 dash lines. The Chinese character means national boundary. So China calls this its national boundaries. This is the same shading that you find on continental land boundary of Asia. So China treats the waters within the 9 dash lines in the same manner it treats its land territory. So we had to protest that one. Now, China considers James Shoal as its southernmost border. Where is James Shoal? James Shoal is 950 nautical miles from Hainan, 400 nautical miles from Ituaba. It is just 80 kilometers from the coast of Bintulu, Malaysia, within the EEZ of Malaysia. This is a totally submerged area. It's about 22 meters below the surface of the water, but China says this is our southernmost border. Now, if this is China's southernmost border, all the waters here constitute the national territory of China. Now, for some time, from 2011, 12, 13, 14, China has been sending a naval task force to James Shoal, and that naval task force would drop sovereignty steel markers made of steel and cement with inscription, "This is the southernmost border of China." And the sailors of that task force would hold an oath-taking ceremony, pledging to defend with their lives the southernmost border of China. Of course, you cannot make an area fully submerged beyond your territorial sea as your border, because your border has to be within your land territory or within your territorial sea. But China just ignores that under the 9 dash line. Now, in 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines. You will recall there was a standoff from April to June of 2012 between Chinese Coast Guard vessels and Philippine Coast Guard vessels. The Americans brokered an agreement for a mutual withdrawal. We agreed to the withdrawal. China agreed to the withdrawal. So we withdrew. China did not withdraw. So up to now, Chinese Coast Guard vessels have remained in Scarborough Shoal. Where is Scarborough Shoal? That's about 124 nautical miles from Zambales within our EEZ. It has been the traditional fishing ground of Filipinos since the Spanish times. But under the 9 dash lines, China claims ownership of Scarborough Shoal. In 2013, 6 months after seizing Scarborough Shoal, China seized Lucuña Shoals from Malaysia. But Malaysia kept quiet about it, did not inform anybody. Until June 4 of 2015, when the National Security Advisor to the Prime Minister of Malaysia posted this on his Facebook with this statement: "This small island is not a disputed territory, but a foreign ship which came here has intruded into our national waters." This Lucuña Shoal, and that is the ship, that Haijing 1123, that anchored here April of 2013 and never left up to now. It has anchored there permanently. It's being resupplied by other Chinese Coast Guard vessels. Now, Lucuña Shoals is one of the largest reef formations in the Spratlys. It's the traditional fishing ground of fishermen from Miri here, and today they complain they can no longer go to Lucuña Shoals to fish because they're being driven away by this Coast Guard vessel. The same complaints that our fishermen in Zambales air about Scarborough Shoal. So that's under the 9 dash line. China claims ownership of Lucuña Shoals. Now, in 2014, China placed this billion-dollar oil rig here within the EEZ of Vietnam. And of course, Vietnamese workers in their export processing zones rioted, burned several Chinese factories. A Vietnamese fishing vessel sank near the oil rig after being rammed by a Chinese vessel. Now, recent reports reveal that China is building 3 more of these oil rigs, and I suspect one of those oil rigs will be placed in the Reed Bank. Now, Wang Yilin, chairman of the China National Offshore Oil Company, calls these oil rigs strategic weapons that form part of China's mobile national sovereignty. So that's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. China claims ownership of waters within the EEZ of Vietnam. In 2014, China, through Hainan, promulgated a fisheries regulation. That Article 35 of that fisheries regulation state, foreign fishing vessels entering the waters under the jurisdiction of Hainan to fish must secure approval from Chinese authorities. And the fishery regulations apply to Macclesfield Bank, which is part of the high seas. Now, Hainan claims these are the waters under the jurisdiction of Hainan. It includes the high seas. These are the high seas in the South China Sea. Of course, the high seas are part of the global commons. It belongs to mankind, but China says anyone who wants to fish here must secure permission from Chinese authorities. This area here is administered by Guangdong province. So China claims even the high seas as its national territory. Now, the latest incident happened in Natuna, near Natuna Island. On March 19 this year, the Indonesian Coast Guard caught a Chinese fishing vessel illegally fishing here in the EEZ of Natuna Islands. It is called exclusive economic zone because the economic exploitation of the zone is exclusive to the adjacent coastal state. It's only the state, Indonesia, that can exploit all the natural living and non-living resources here. But China says, no, this is our traditional fishing grounds. That's against UNCLOS, but China just ignores UNCLOS. So this ship was towed by the Coast Guard vessel of Indonesia towards the territorial sea. When it reached this area, a Chinese Coast Guard vessel appeared, bumped the fishing vessel of China. It got freed from the towing Indonesian Coast Guard vessel, and it was towed back to China by the Chinese Coast Guard vessel. And of course, that angered Indonesia. But that's the meaning of the 9 dash lines. China claims waters here as part of its traditional fishing grounds, which is against UNCLOS. Now, every year, China imposes a fishing moratorium in the South China Sea from mid-May to end July. So it's going on now. And China sent a note verbal to the Philippines on July 6, 2015, demanding that the Philippines educate its own fishermen so they can strictly abide by the fishing moratorium, otherwise they will be punished. So China claims jurisdiction over the high seas, which is against international law, against UNCLOS. That's the meaning of the 9 dash line. China claims sovereignty over even the high seas. Now, UNCLOS declares, before and after UNCLOS, the high seas have always been part of the global commons. UNCLOS declares the high seas are open to all states, whether coastal or landlocked. Freedom of the high seas includes freedom of fishing. Even landlocked countries have a right to fish in the high seas of the South China Sea. So Laos, Nepal, Austria, all landlocked countries of the world have an interest, can fish from in the high seas of the South China Sea without securing permission from anyone because there is freedom of fishing in the high seas. UNCLOS declares no state may validly purport to subject any part of the high seas to its sovereignty. China just ignores that by promulgating its fisheries regulation. I call that the grand theft of the global commons because China is stealing what belongs to all mankind. Now, all of these acts of China, among so many others, demonstrate beyond doubt that China is claiming sovereignty, sovereign rights and jurisdiction to all the waters, fisheries, oil, gas, mineral resources, seabed, subsoil enclosed by the 9 dash lines. It cannot be denied anymore. China claims the entire South China Sea within the 9 dash lines. Some Chinese lawyers have claimed the 9 dash lines are just a concept. It's just an idea. You cannot legally question it. No, it's not just an idea. It's being implemented by acts, declarations, regulations of China. Notes verbal. They're all there. China claims everything within the 9-dash lines. Last June 5, during the Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, the Chinese Deputy Chief of the General Staff of the PLA said, the Philippines is the first country to invade the South China Sea. Can you imagine that? Because China claims 85.7% of the South China Sea as its national territory. But of course, we all know from history that the French seized the Paracels in 1930s. The Japanese seized Paracels and the Spratlys during World War II. The Vietnamese had long been there in the Paracels for a long time. Even the Malaysians took over part of the Spratlys in the 70s. We were not the first. And first of all, you cannot invade the global commons. It belongs to everyone. But China says, no, that is our national territory. So what will be left with the Philippines? Under the 9-dash line, the Philippines will be left with a sliver of water as its territorial sea, exclusive economic zone. We will be sharing a very long common sea border with China from Balabac Island, our southernmost island in Palawan, to Yami Island in northern Batanes, our northernmost island in Batanes. That's 1,300 kilometers long common sea border with China. You know, we always thought that China was so far away. Hainan is there, and there was a buffer, the South China Sea. No longer the case because China just moved its boundary here. Now, Foreign Minister Wang Yi of China spoke before the CIS in Washington, D.C. last 25 February, and he said, we are neighbors with the Philippines, just separated by a narrow body of water. This is the narrow body of water that Wang Yi was referring to. This is what separates the Philippines and China. We are neighbors, just separated by a narrow body of water. Because in the mindset of the Chinese diplomats, admirals, generals, Politburo members, they own these waters here, and the border with the Philippines is this. So a narrow body of water separates the Philippines and China. China just moved its border very close to the Philippines. What does it mean to have a common border with China, a long one? You ask the Vietnamese. In their history, the moment they lowered their guard, they would become a province of China. So let's go to the concepts under UNCLOS. Assume this is Palawan. From the low water mark, you measure 12 nautical miles. That's the territorial sea. At the edge of the territorial sea, you measure 188 nautical miles up to, that's the EEZ. From here, you measure an additional 150 nautical miles. That's the extended continental shelf. The fish here and all the mineral resources here, oil, gas, belongs to the coastal state, exclusive economic zone of the coastal state. This is the extended continental shelf. The fish here belongs to mankind. This is now the high seas, but the mineral resources here, oil, gas, and others, belong to the coastal state. This is the area administered by the International Seabed Authority, created under UNCLOS. This is part of the common heritage of mankind. If you want to exploit this, you have to get a permit from the International Seabed Authority. So far, the authority has issued 34 permits to explore the area worldwide. 4 permits have gone to China, the highest number for any state. So the continental shelf is here. It's composed of the exclusive economic zone and the extended continental shelf as far as the coastal state is concerned. Now, in the South China Sea, the maximum that a state can claim is 350 nautical miles because of the geology and geomorphology of the South China Sea. No coastal state in the South China Sea can claim more than 350 nautical miles from its coastline. China is claiming up to 950 nautical miles. So China just ignores totally UNCLOS. Now, let's go to the Spratlys. China occupies 7 reefs. These are the 7 reefs that China occupies. China has built islands on all 7 reefs, but in the process of creating those islands, China dredged 10 other reefs. So China has actually destroyed 17 reefs. Now, here is Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, and Fiery Cross Reef. We'll just discuss those 3. These are the biggest reclamations of China. Let's go to Fiery Cross Reef. Fiery Cross Reef is what is called a high tide elevation. Because at high tide, you still see 1 meter of rock above water. So it's called a high tide elevation, which means that 1 meter of rock above water at high tide is territory. It's land. It's entitled to a territorial sea, a territorial airspace. Territorial sea is 12 nautical miles. Out of that 1 meter rock above water at high tide, China reclaimed 274 hectares to create this island, Fiery Cross Reef. It is an air base, 3-kilometer runway with a wharf, with a docking facility for warships. So this is an air base with a port. And Admiral Harris, the U.S. commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, said 3-kilometer runway is enough for a B-52 to land and take off. Even a 747 can take off here. It's just 3,000 feet short for a space shuttle to land. This one can take in any military aircraft of China. Fighter bombers, long-range bombers, tanker fleet. They can all land here. And China just opened this up with 2 flights, civilian flights, and 1 military flight. So it's operational now. This is Subi Reef. This is just outside our EEZ, but within our extended continental shelf. This is very near Pag-asa, our largest island that we occupy in the Spratlys. It is just a little over 12 nautical miles from Pag-asa. So it's just outside the territorial sea of Pag-asa. Before the reclamation, this was totally submerged at high tide. It's a low tide elevation. China has reclaimed 500 hectares now out of totally submerged area with a 3-kilometer runway, and this is the harbor. Before the dredging, this was already 22 meters deep. It's deeper now, so it's ideal for warships to stay here. And this is the entry and exit for warships and submarines. This is the harbor. So it's a naval base with a runway. Fiery Cross Reef is an air base with a harbor. Now, Article 88 of UNCLOS states, the high seas shall be reserved for peaceful purposes. These waters are in the high seas of the South China Sea. So China violates, obviously, UNCLOS, Article 88, because China has put up a naval base with an airstrip in this fully submerged area. It's fully submerged, so it's part of the high seas. But China just ignored. This is 500 hectares. It's huge. The third one is Mischief Reef. That's the reclamation as of May 1. Now, this is the runway, 3-kilometer runway again. So China has 3 airfields in the Spratlys. Can you imagine that? Very close to each other. This is 590 hectares reclamation. This is the entry and exit for warships and submarines. This is even deeper than Subi Reef. It's 26 meters deep before the dredging, so it's deeper now. How big is 590 hectares? The San Juan City is 594 hectares, just 4 hectares larger than this. So this is very big, almost as big as San Juan City. So there is an airstrip, there's a naval base, and China can garrison thousands of Chinese Marines here. And this is the big worry of our naval commanders, because where is Mischief Reef? This is Mischief Reef, Palawan, Pag-asa. So it's in between the islands that we hold here. This mischief reef will block our resupply to Pag-asa and all the other islands. The strategy of China is to choke off our resupply so that we will abandon the islands that we possess here. If you look at the airfields and naval bases, you have Fiery Cross Reef here, Subi Reef, Mischief Reef. It's a triangle. And strategically located because it encloses the islands here. And this is Second Thomas Shoal, where this brave, dilapidated ship has been pitched, manned by 12 soldiers, Philippine soldiers. The Chinese are just waiting for the superstructure of this vessel to collapse. But they are not seizing this because this is still in the roster of active military ships. And if they attack it, that could trigger the operation of the Mutual Defense Treaty, because under the Mutual Defense Treaty, any attack on a public vessel in the Pacific area, which is defined to include the South China Sea, any attack on a public vessel of the Philippines or the US will trigger the operation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. So they're just waiting. The Chinese Coast Guard vessels just circle around here 24 hours a day. They circle around it to prevent our large ships to bring steel bars and cement to fortify the superstructure. But we will have a problem maintaining this once Mischief Reef is operational. Right now we can send small crafts that can navigate the shallow waters of Second Thomas Shoal. The big Chinese Coast Guards cannot follow them. But once this is operational as a naval base of China, they can send small crafts here and they will block a resupply to BRP Sierra Madre. That's the worry of our naval commanders. Recently, just very recently, Francois Javier Bonet, he has written extensively on the South China Sea. He came out with a new article, and he said everybody thinks that the Spratlys have shallow waters, but the Spratlys have deep canyons. These are secret submarine passages used by the Japanese during World War II and being used by the Americans now, and the Chinese will be using that once they have their air and naval bases. And because these are deep canyons, the submarines will hide there, it will be difficult to detect them. Now, China has an air base in Woody Island, 3-kilometer air base. Woody Island is the largest island in the Paracels. It has now an operating air base in Fiery Cross Reef. My personal assessment is China will build an air and naval base in Scarborough Shoal. So it will have a triangle of air bases. It will now enforce an ADIZ, an Air Defense ID Zone. Why will China do that? Because Hainan is the home base of its nuclear-armed submarines. The missiles of China in their nuclear submarines have a range of only 7,500 kilometers, 7,500 kilometers. If they fire their missiles here, it will not reach continental USA. It will fall short. Their submarines will have to exit through the Bassi Channel and fire their missiles in the mid-Pacific to reach the entire continental USA. So they must protect their outlet here. That's why they have to build an air and naval base. That is the reason why China seized Scarborough Shoal. Very strategic move. Why did China seize Mischief Reef in 1995? We said in 1995, what will China do with Mischief Reef? It's a submerged area at high tide. Very strategic move because China knew it would build or planned to build an air and naval base one day in Mischief Reef. The same, they seized Scarborough Shoal for a strategic reason. Now, last June 2015, China conducted its first ever air and sea drills in the Bassi Channel. And China said air and naval drills will be routine. They'll do that regularly because they have to protect their outlet here. Their other outlet is through the Taiwan Strait, but their problem is they will have to pass through the Okinawa Island chain where the Japanese have placed detectors and the Japanese Suryo-class submarines are waiting for them. Those Japanese Suryo-class submarines are the best diesel-electric submarines in the world. So China seized the islands for strategic reasons, very strategic, long-term. Now what happened? Well, in 2015, China came out with its white paper on its military strategy, and that white paper said China will shift from offshore water defense to open seas protection. They will now shift to open seas protection. The white paper states the traditional mentality that land outweighs the sea must be abandoned. Great importance is to be attached to managing the seas and oceans and protecting maritime rights and interests. Protecting maritime rights and interests are China's code word to enforce the 9 dash lines as its national boundaries. Today, China's air and naval bases here. It will now enforce the 9 dash lines as its national boundaries. Now let us take a look what happened in the South China Sea since World War II. Before World War II, the southernmost territory of China was Hainan. Not a single Chinese soldier was stationed here. Not a single Chinese sailor was stationed here. No Chinese outpost here. After World War, during the war, the Japanese, of course, seized the paracels from the Vietnamese, and the Japanese put up a submarine base in Ituaba, which was used in the invasion of the Philippines. With the defeat of the Japanese, and they left the South China Sea, China made its move. China seized the Amphitrite group of the Paracels in 1946 and Ituaba. So China, in one stroke, moved its defense perimeter from Hainan to the Crescent Group to Ituaba. The French regained possession of the Crescent Group of the Paracels. So the South Vietnamese inherited the Crescent Group. In 1974, China seized the Paracels, this Crescent Group from the South Vietnamese in the Battle of the Paracels. Several South Vietnamese ships were sunk in that battle. And in 1988, China seized Johnson South 3 from the Communist Vietnamese. 77 Vietnamese sailors died in that skirmish. 1995, China seized Mischief Free from the Philippines. 2012, China seized Scarborough Shoal from the Philippines. 2013, China seized Lucuña Shoals from Malaysia. So you can see a gradual expansion of Chinese territory into the 9 dash lines, and China now is in a position to enforce the 9 dash lines as its national boundaries. So these have been very strategic moves of China. That's why I believe China will also reclaim Lucuña Shoals and put up an air and naval base. I will explain that later. Now, what is China's grand design in the South China Sea? Very obvious. The grand design is to control the South China Sea for economic and military purposes. China wants all the fisheries, oil, gas, and mineral resources within the 9 dash lines. Today, China takes 50% of the annual fish catch in the South China Sea. In the 1990s, China was only taking 20%. But because 80% of the coastal waters of China are now polluted, they have to fish further out, even within the EEZ of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. China has the highest per capita consumption of fish in the world, and they want all of the fish in the South China Sea. Now, China is also the largest net importer of petroleum in the world. Now, the South China Sea is believed to be rich in methane hydrates. The methane hydrates are supposed to be one of the fuels of the future. What is a methane hydrate? It's a lump of mineral. Trapped within that lump is gas. There's a process, there's a technology now to extract that gas, but it's very expensive as of the moment, but the cost will go down one day, and China estimates that all the methane hydrates in the South China Sea will fuel the Chinese economy for 300 years. Now, China also wants the South China Sea as a sanctuary, of course, for its nuclear-armed submarines, so that the Poseidons of the US, these are aircraft that can drop torpedoes from the air. They don't want those Poseidons flying in the South China Sea. Now, some of our people have been saying that the reclamation done by China in the Spratlys is a response to our arbitration case. No. Jiang Zi, head of the Asia-Pacific Security Program of the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, said China wanted to do this for a long time. Now it has the dredging boats, the money, and the people, so it is doing it. China has the capability. We don't have the capability to stop China. Now, let's go to this. Who can create artificial islands on low tide elevations in the EEZ or extended continental shelf? As I said, only the coastal state, the adjacent coastal state, and the adjacent coastal state is Palawan. Very important, and we raised this at the tribunal. Article 60 of UNCLOS on artificial islands, installation structures in the exclusive economic zone. In the exclusive economic zone, the coastal state shall have exclusive right to construct and to authorize and regulate the construction, operation, use of artificial islands, installation, and structures for any economic purpose. The coastal state shall have exclusive jurisdiction over such artificial islands, installation, structures. Who is the coastal state? It's the Philippines. Palawan. We have the exclusive right to put up an artificial island on Mischief Reef, on Subi Reef. This is why we brought the case to the tribunal. We want a confirmation from the tribunal that these low tide elevations are part of our submerged continental shelf. It's only the Philippines that can put up artificial islands. How about in the extended continental shelf, like Subi Reef? The same, Article 60, the one I read earlier, applies to islands, installation, and structures on the continental shelf. It's only the Philippines that can put up an artificial island on Subi Reef. Now, graphically, this is our EEZ. Mischief Reef is here. Subi Reef is here. In this area, only the Philippines can put up islands or structures. Do low tide elevations and artificial islands acquire maritime zone if by island building they are raised above water at high tide? So Mischief Reef is now above water at high tide. Do they acquire a territorial sea of 12 nautical miles and a territorial airspace? No, because first, all islands must be naturally formed to be considered an island, and there's an express provision in UNCLOS. Artificial islands, installation structures, do not possess the status of islands. They are not islands. They have no territorial sea of their own. And if they have no territorial sea, they don't have an airspace. The Americans are correct. Subi Reef, Mischief Reef, they are not islands. They have no territorial sea, no territorial airspace, so our ships will sail just beside it, our planes will fly over it. They're correct. So if the tribunal will confirm, then the more they will fly over and sail by. Can a state claim historic rights in the EEZ of another state? No, because UNCLOS says the coastal state has sovereign rights to exploit its EEZ. Sovereign means supreme. So sovereign rights means supreme rights superior to the rights of other states. And the term used is exclusive. The economic exploitation is exclusive to the adjacent coastal state. There can be no doubt about that. Now, the UNCLOS was negotiated from 1973 to 1982, and China actively participated in the negotiations from the start. Now, there was one big stumbling block in the negotiations. It was the breadth of the EEZ. Should it be 12 nautical miles, 100 nautical miles, 200, 300, 500? The countries with huge fishing fleet wanted it short because in the EEZ, the coastal state has exclusive right to fish. So their fishing grounds will be constricted if there will be a very long EEZ. The landlocked countries also wanted a shorter EEZ because they cannot fish if it's longer. They have a right to fish in the high seas, but not in the EEZ. And of course, the naval powers didn't want also a longer EEZ. So there was this big problem. There had to be a compromise, otherwise there will be no law of the sea. So there was a compromise. Eventually, the compromise was 200 nautical miles. Each coastal state is entitled to an EEZ of 200 nautical miles, but must waive all historic claims to all other areas, because if they don't waive, there's still dispute. The purpose of UNCLOS is to settle all disputes, to stabilize, to ensure peace and stability in the oceans and seas of our planet. So you have 200 nautical miles, but you waive everything else so that there will be no more dispute. Everybody agreed. That was the big compromise. So we have the law of the sea. Today, China is saying we are entitled to 200 nautical miles from our coastline, but we have historic rights to the rest of the South China Sea. They cannot do that. That's why we brought this case to the tribunal. We want the 9 dash lines struck down, because all these members of the tribunal know the law of the sea. They live the law of the sea. They teach, they study, they teach, they practice the law of the sea. They know this by heart. That's why I'm pretty confident the 9 dash lines will be struck down. Now, in fact, there are specific provisions in UNCLOS embodying this agreement. UNCLOS says the rights of a coastal state over the continental shelf do not depend on occupation or any express proclamation. We don't have to declare our continental shelf. Remember, the continental shelf is composed of the EEZ, Exclusive Economic Zone, and the Extended Continental Shelf. We don't have to proclaim. We are entitled to that. ICJ, International Court of Justice, has explained the rights of a coastal state exist ipso facto and ab initio by virtue of its sovereignty over the land. We have sovereignty over Palawan. Because we have sovereignty over Palawan, ipso facto ab initio, we have a continental shelf extending to 350 nautical miles. Now, there's another provision. If the coastal state does not explore the continental shelf or exploit its resources, no one may undertake such activities without the express consent of the coastal state. We don't have to do anything. No country can exploit our continental shelf composed of EEZ and extended continental shelf. We are protected by international law. That's why historic rights to the EEZ have been extinguished by agreement and by express provision here. But China just ignores that now and claims historic rights to almost the entire South China Sea. Okay, this is the continental shelf. Ipso facto ab initio, Palawan has a continental shelf. We don't have to proclaim it. It is ours. Ab initio, ipso facto. So we have this ab initio, ipso facto. It cannot be touched by any country. Now, in the tribunal, we raised 2 main issues. We have other issues, but the first one is the validity of the 9 dash lines. If we win that one, it's a huge victory already. The second big issue that we raised is Ito Aba, whether Ito Aba is capable of human habitation of its own. Because if it's capable of human habitation of its own, it is entitled to 12 nautical miles plus an EEZ up to 200 nautical miles. If it has a 200 nautical mile EEZ, there will be an overlap with the Palawan EEZ. So we had to prove that Ito Aba is not capable of human habitation. The number one essential requirement before you can be considered capable of human habitation, before the island can be considered capable of human habitation, it must have fresh, natural drinking water. And we presented scientific papers of Taiwan government, made by their own scientists. In 1994, they had a survey of Ito Aba, and this is their conclusion. The underground water in Ito Aba is salty and unusable for drinking. Their own scientific paper. So it's not capable of human habitation. This is 1994, before the dispute. And they had several scientific papers before the dispute saying this. Another one, in year 2000, their scholar and the government consultant, Dr. Sung, said, cargo vessels of private shipping companies sail to Itoaba once or 2 times a month to supply the island's daily needs. So if Taiwan will not send supplies, the people in Itoaba cannot survive. They need supplies from the outside. So Itoaba is not capable of human habitation of its own. And this Taiwanese scholar also said that Itoaba is 43 hectares, the largest. The Spratly Islands have no permanent inhabitants and are too small to sustain permanent independent settlement. That is the findings, conclusions of Taiwanese scientists before the dispute. We filed our case January of 2013. After that, all of them sang a different tune. They're now saying there's drinking water in Itoaba, it's capable of human habitation. But some still insist on the truth. This law professor, Chang Wangxi, in 2015, he said, all necessities except sunlight and air have to be supplied from outside the island. It cannot survive. The only thing you can get is sunlight and air. All the rest will have to be imported. Of course, Taiwan filed an amicus curiae brief. Now, Dr. Sung and all the rest are saying there is water, drinking water in Itoaba. Well, we'll see how the tribunal will rule, whether what you said before the dispute is correct or what you said after the dispute is the one that's correct. Now, assuming worst case scenario, Itoaba is capable of human habitation of its own. If it's capable of human habitation, it's entitled to 200 nautical miles. There will be an overlap with the Palawan EEZ, and this is the overlap. This is the disputed area. How will that be resolved if we submit it to a court? Well, if there's an overlap, first of all, that means it will not be subject to compulsory arbitration because that's one of the reservations of China. But the framers of the convention made sure that all maritime disputes will be settled within the convention. So the default settlement system was compulsory arbitration. But some naval powers didn't want to be subjected to compulsory arbitration. So if you exempt yourself from compulsory arbitration in case of overlapping zones, you have to fall into compulsory conciliation. You cannot escape compulsory conciliation. The difference between compulsory arbitration and compulsory conciliation is in compulsory arbitration, the decision is mandatory, binding. In compulsory conciliation, it's just recommendatory. But it is still a statement of what international law is with respect to the dispute. It has a very strong moral force. So, assuming that Itoaba is declared to be habitable on its own, we can bring the case to compulsory conciliation. By the way, East Timor is the first country to bring another country, Australia, to compulsory conciliation because Australia withdrew from compulsory arbitration. So East Timor sued under compulsory conciliation. Now, how will the tribunal, the commission rule? The criteria is the length of the overlapping coastline, opposing coastline. Itoaba has a coastline of only 1 kilometer facing Palawan. Our coastline is 495 nautical miles facing Itoaba. So the ratio is 1:495 in favor of Palawan. What is the meaning of that? We'll go to a case, Nicaragua versus Colombia. In that case, the ratio was 1:8.2. For every 1 kilometer of coastline of Colombia, Nicaragua had 8.2. And because of that, the court said that is substantial disparity. All the waters will go to Nicaragua. This is the sketch attached to the decision in that case. This is Nicaragua with the 531-kilometer coastline. all the islands here of Colombia had a total of 65, so the ratio is 1:8.2. The court said, all the waters here, this is just 200 nautical mile gap. All the waters here belong to Nicaragua, and the islands here will be given an EEZ seaward. Why? Because there is substantial disparity. Of course, common sense. The landmass with a longer coastline should have more water as against an opposing island with a smaller coastline. That's the, see the, this is San Andres, and it's a huge island, 2,600 hectares, about 56 times larger than Ituaba, with a permanent population of 67,000, but it was not given any EEZ facing Nicaragua. Ituaba is just 43 hectares. So we are sure that if this is brought to a compulsory conciliation commission, this is the result. There's another case, Bangladesh versus Myanmar. This is Myanmar. This is Bangladesh. Bangladesh has an island here, St. Martin's Island, about 800 hectares with a coastline of 16 kilometers, while the coastline of Myanmar is 587. The tribunal said this island of 800 hectares, 17 times larger than Ituaba, will have no EEZ because the opposing coastline is very long. If you give it an EEZ, it will block off the EEZ of Myanmar, which is a longer coastline. It's just common sense. The landmass, the island with a longer coastline is entitled to more waters if there are opposing coastlines. Now, in 2002, China and ASEAN signed the Declaration of Conduct, and it says, the dispute shall be resolved in accordance with universally recognized principles of international law, including the 1982 UNCLOS. So, the dispute should be resolved under international law, and the primary law is UNCLOS, of course. So we filed a case before the tribunal. It says, follow UNCLOS. After we filed, Foreign Minister Wang Yi said the dispute should be resolved in accordance with historical facts and international law. So they changed the parameters. But we are game. Let's go to the historical facts. Our ancient maps will prove that throughout the Chinese dynasties, from the Song to the Qing, the southernmost Chinese territory has always been Hainan Island. Our own official and unofficial maps of the Philippines from 1636 to 1933 show that Scarborough Shoal has always been part of the Philippines. Let's go to the map. This is the oldest map that you can find of China. If this is paper, on paper, it would have crumbled. Why is it still in existence today? Because this is engraved in stone. This map was engraved in stone. There's only one copy. And you can still see this map in the Museum of Stone Steels in Xi'an, China. It's still there. And the Frenchman made a stone rubbing. That's why we have a copy of this. And it shows Hainan Island as the southernmost territory of China during the Song Dynasty, China, and the barbarian countries. That's the meaning of that. Fast forward to the Qing Dynasty, the last dynasty of China, ended in 1912. This is the last official map of the Qing Dynasty that I could find. It's entitled The Qing Empire's Complete Map of All Provinces, and it shows Hainan in inset as part of Guangdong. Throughout the dynasties, Hainan has always been part of Guangdong. And you see here, remember this, there's nothing here. Paracels are not found here. So it's only Hainan. So throughout the dynasties, Hainan has always been the southernmost part of China. If you superimpose that, it only ended here. It never reached the South China Sea or the islands here. How about the Philippines, 1734? This is the mother of all Philippine maps, made by a Jesuit priest, printed in Manila, drawn by a Filipino, Francisco Suarez, and the engraver was another Filipino, Nicolas de la Cruz Bagay. And it shows Panakot. Panakot is Scarborough Shoal. For the first time, Scarborough Shoal was given a name, and the name is a Filipino name, Panakot. It means danger. Why danger? Because if you are the captain of a ship and you don't know where it is, your ship will hit the rocks of Panakot and your ship will sink or run aground. And that is what happened to a British tea-clipper ship called Scarborough. That's why European cartographers named it Scarborough Shoal. And it shows here Los Baos de Paragua. What is Paragua? That's the old name, Spanish name of Palawan. Los Baos, what is the meaning of Los Baos? Los Baos is a Spanish term for shoals. The shoals of Palawan. These are the Spratlys. So, in 1734, we already included Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys as part of Philippine territory. There is no older map from China or from Vietnam showing that these two features, Scarborough and the Spratlys, are part of their territory. None. We have the oldest map with a name. And that's not even the oldest map that we have. 1695 map by Father Coronelli. He was a Franciscan. You know, the Franciscan arrived in the Philippines in 1578. And like all the religious orders, they would send regular reports to the Vatican, to their head office. What are the new towns? What are the new islands? And so on. So this Father Coronelli received all of these reports, and he drew maps. He was a map maker, a famous one. And he drew lines around the Philippines, around the Dutch Indies. And you see here, Palawan. He included the Spratlys as part of Palawan. Back in 1695, we already included the Spratlys as part of the Philippines. When the Americans came in 1898, the Treaty of Paris was signed in 1898. The following year, they came out with this map. The first map of the American regime, and it says United States Coast and Geodetic Survey, and they placed here Bajo de Masinloc. That's Scarborough Shoal. But they dropped the Spratlys because the Americans said they are worthless. So, now, in 1932, as I said, the French seized the Paracels, and China protested, sent a note verbal to the French government on September 29, 1932. That is the official note verbal of China to the French, and that note verbal says, after describing the Eastern group as the Amphitrites, the Western group as the Crescent, the note verbal says, these groups lie 145 nautical miles from Hainan Island and form the southernmost part of Chinese territory. Form the southernmost part of Chinese territory. Therefore, Scarborough is not part of Chinese territory. The Spratlys are not part of Chinese territory. Their own official document announcing to the world that their southernmost territory are the Paracels. You see, they tweak it a little bit. Instead of Hainan, they said now it includes the Paracels. So, this is it. Even if you include the Paracels, it's still very far from the Spratlys and Scarborough Shoal. The following year, 1933, China published this map, and you will see now, Hainan, it included now the Paracels. For the first time, throughout the Chinese dynasties, it only ended up to here. Now they added the Paracels. It's the start of their cartographic expansion or invasion of the South China Sea. That is the original 9 dash line maps. The title itself says it's a claim to islands only, location map of South Sea Islands. So it's impliedly claims only islands. It doesn't claim the entire sea. Now, if you look at this, these are the Pratas, the Paracels, the Spratlys, and this is Macclesfield Bank. China calls it Zhongsha Island. The Macclesfield Bank is fully submerged. The highest peak is 9 meters below the surface of the water. It's not an island. It's fully submerged, part of the high seas, but China calls it island so that it can claim it. Okay, let's go to Zhongsha Island. These are the features. You can read it in the map here. You cannot see Scarborough Shoal. China has two names for Scarborough Shoal, Wangyan and Minjujiao. China said we gave it a name in 1935 as Wangyan and in 1947, Minjujiao. But you don't find it here. There's no Wangyan or Minjujiao in the 9 dash lines. So they never claimed it. Now, in 1980s, China and Vietnam quarreled over the parcels. You know, Vietnam has a very strong historical records of their ownership of Vietnam. But China said, wait a minute, we have an older record. That is, in 1279, during the Mongol dynasty, Gu Sujing went to Xija Island, what is known as the Paracels, and he put up an astronomical observatory. Who is Gu Sujing? He was the Leonardo da Vinci of China at that time, a brilliant guy, astronomer, mathematician, engineer. He built irrigation canals, he built observatories. No, he built 27 observatories, 26 in mainland China and 1 in the South Sea. China does not call the South China Sea as South China Sea. It calls it Nanhai, South Sea. So Gu Sujing put up 1 in Nanhai, South Sea. And where in Nanhai? In 1980, China said it was placed in Xija, in the Paracels. And they officially declared it in their document, Beijing Review. That's the Beijing Review. There's this article by the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of China. The astronomical observation point Nanhai was today's Xija Islands. It shows that Xija Islands were within the bounds of China at the time of the Yuan dynasty. The Yuan dynasty was the Mongol dynasty. The first emperor was Kublai Khan, and according to the Chinese, Kublai Khan sent Gu Sujing to Xija to put up the observatory. Therefore, we have an older claim to the Paracels. Today, you go to the Chinese embassy website in Manila, you find this statement. Wangyan Island, Scarborough Shoal, was first discovered and drew into China's map in the Yuan dynasty, that's the Mongol dynasty. In 1279, Chinese astronomer Gu Sujing performed surveying of the seas around China for Kublai Khan, and Wangyan Island was chosen as a point in the South China Sea. In other words, Wangyan Island was the place where Gu Sujing put up his observatory, his sole observatory in the South China Sea. But they cannot do that anymore. They already claimed Gu Sujing put it up in the Paracels. Now they're claiming, because we have a quarrel over Scarborough Shoal, they're saying, oh, we have an older title, 1279. Could Gu Sujing have put it up in Scarborough Shoal? Now, of the 26 observatory that Gu Sujing put up in mainland China, 1 still exists today in Henan province. This is it. 12.6 meter high. There's a sundial, very long, solid rock. And to operate this, you have to be there every day of the year. You have to take the measurements of the sunrise, sunset. There are astronomical observation points here for the stars, because China was an agricultural economy at the time. It was not a sea power. And they needed a very accurate calendar to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to irrigate. And this guy produced a calendar more accurate than the European calendar at the time. The guy is a genius. But could he have put this up in Scarborough Shoal? Scarborough Shoal is just 1.2 meters above water at high tide. A few people can stand on top of it. If you superimpose what he built in Henan, that's it. It's impossible. So Gu Sujing never went to Scarborough Shoal. It's impossible, physically impossible. Legally impossible because they already said he put it up in Xija, Paracels. Now, China claims that there are 3 conferences that awarded the Paracels and Spratlys to China. You know, they have been issuing these statements recently because in anticipation of the ruling of the tribunal, Their embassies worldwide have been issuing statements. And one of the statements, uniformly distributed, is that the 3 conferences awarded the paracels and Spartans to China. Now, the Cairo conference was attended by Roosevelt, Churchill, and Chiang Kai-shek, and it produced a press release. It stated the territories taken from China by Japan. So, territories taken from China by Japan, including Manchuria, Taiwan, and the Pescadores, would be returned to the Republic of China after the conflict ended. So, it must be a territory taken from China. The paracels were seized by Japan from the French, not taken from China. The Spratlys were unoccupied. Japan just occupied it. So it could not have included the paracels and the Spratlys. Let's go to the next conference, the Potsdam Conference among Truman, Churchill, and Stalin. This was after the surrender of Germany, and they issued what is called the Potsdam Declaration, signed by US, UK, and China. The USSR had not yet declared war on Japan, so it did not sign that declaration. But the Potsdam Declaration never mentioned the paracels or the Spratlys. Never awarded these islands to China, nothing at all. But China claims Potsdam Declaration awarded it to them. That's false. The San Francisco Peace Treaty of 1951. China also claims that they were awarded that. But China was not represented because there was a civil war. In fact, China, People's Republic of China, denounced the treaty as illegal because paracels and Spratlys were not awarded to China. In fact, the USSR made a formal motion to the conference that the paracels and the Spratlys be awarded to the People's Republic of China. It was put to a vote. And the motion was lost by 46-3 with 1 abstention. The motion of Soviet Russia that the paracels and Spratlys be awarded to China was lost. It was defeated. So all of this, China is asserting all of these historical lies. Unless you confront China with all of these facts, they will get away with it. Now, President Mao was the former president of Taiwan just before Chiang Kai. In 2015, he was still the president. President Mao belongs to the Kuomintang Party, and he created a panel of experts. When the Kuomintang fled China, mainland China in 1949, they carted with them all the records of the 9-dash line because the Kuomintang invented the 9-dash lines. They brought with them to Taipei all the records. And President Ma wanted to prove the historical basis of the 9-dash lines. So he created a panel of experts to shift through all these records, thousands of them, to pick up the best record to prove that China's 9-dash lines have historical basis. And that's what they did. And this is the product. It's a book entitled Compilation of Historical Archives of the Southern Territories of the Republic of China. Taiwan sent a copy of the book to each member of the tribunal at The Hague without our knowing it. And the tribunal ordered us to comment on the book. So we filed our comment, and we said, of the tens of thousands of historical records reviewed by the experts who compiled the archives, not a single document could be identified asserting China's claim to the South China Sea before 1907. The earliest record that they could present in this book is 1907. President Ma himself wrote in the preface of the book, China's sovereignty over the South China Sea island dates only to the early 20th century, 1935 to be exact. And the book contains a timeline of key events summarizing China's historical evidence to support the 9-dash line, and the chronology of events starts only in 1907. And the 1907 to 1935 records refer to China's claims to pratas and the paracels, not the Spratlys. Chinese claims to the Spratlys started only in 1935. That's the book. It starts in 1907. So Taiwan has debunked the mainland's claim that they own the South China Sea since 2,000 years ago. See, China, mainland China, refused to participate in the tribunals, in the proceedings, but they sent a position paper. They said, we will not participate, but this is our position. And in their paper, they said, Chinese activities in the South China Sea date back to over 2,000 years ago. China was the first country to discover, name, explore, and exploit the resources of the South China Sea, and the first to continuously exercise sovereign jurisdiction. But of course, all of that were debunked by Taiwan in that book. But let us go to our own research. Let's go to the territories of China throughout the dynasties. We have the sources. We'll go over this quickly. Han Dynasty, it never reached Hainan or Formosa. Manchuria is still outside of the dynasty. The Three Kingdoms, Hainan is outside, Formosa or Taiwan is outside. The Qin and the Eastern Jin, outside. Sui Dynasty, then that started, they took Hainan as part. Formosa was still outside, nothing here. The Tang Dynasty, Taiwan is still out. You have the Song Dynasty, Southern Song, Taiwan is still out. You have the Northern Song, Taiwan still out. Yuan, the Mongol Dynasty, Taiwan still out. Ming Dynasty, Qing. That's when they got Taiwan, one of the largest, because the Qings were supported by the Mongols, so they included the Mongols. In the present day, Mongolia is a separate state. Republic of Taiwan is a renegade province. But that's it. Never reached the South China Sea. How about our own records? National Geographic last 2014 published a story about the Champa Sea. For centuries, the South China Sea was known by navigators throughout Asia as the Champa Sea, named for a great empire that controlled all of central Vietnam. Where is Champa? It's there. This is an 1895 map of Mortillos. You know, the Chams created a maritime kingdom. The Chams had a distinctive sailboat because the sailboat had an outrigger, the same as the sailboats of the Filipinos, the ancestors of the Filipinos, the Austronesians, the same as the Malaysians, the Javans. Now, the Chams, the ancestors of the Chams spoke a Malayo-Polynesian language, derived from the Austronesian language, just like Tagalog. Tagalog is derived from the Austronesian language. Cham comes from the word champaka, the champaka tree. Now, the Chams are believed to have migrated from Borneo to central Vietnam. And they had temples as intricate as the Angkor Wat, but smaller. Their works of art are as good as the works of art of people in Angkor Wat. They were a great kingdom. From the 2nd to the 12th century, they were the masters of the South China Sea. That's why the South China Sea was called the Champa Sea. When the Europeans came, when the Portuguese came, the Dutch came, they asked the people in the islands here, what's the name of your island? Pulo. Pulo Perfir, Pulo Condor. What is Pulo? Pulo is a Tagalog word which means island, isolated place. This is a 1578 map. That means it was during the Ming Dynasty. The Ming Dynasty ended in 1644. So, in all their maps, Portuguese and Dutch, you can see islands here in the South China Sea named Pulo. Island named Pulo, that's a Tagalog word. Palawan comes from the word Puluwan. Palau comes from Pulo. So on the Pacific side, the Austronesians migrated. The Austronesians made the widest migration by sea of people throughout the ages, from central Vietnam to Madagascar to the Easter Island. All Austronesians, they speak the Austronesian language. One common characteristic, even for people in Madagascar, they have a sailboat without rigger. That is the technology that allowed them to sail the seas, Pacific Ocean and South China Sea. Another map, 1600, you will see here Pulo. The islands here were named Pulo. Here, 1606 map, all Pulo. So all the islands were named Pulo. When the Portuguese and the Dutch arrived in those islands, they asked the native, what's the name of your island? Pulo Condor, Pulo Firfir. Because the Austronesians were there first. Our ancestors. What is our legal basis for the Philippines to claim Scarborough Shoal? We always say it's the Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris drew lines. Scarborough Shoal happens to be outside the lines. That's the big problem. And again, our favorite foreign minister Wang Yi said, he spoke during his February 25, 2016 speech at the CSIS in Washington. He said, the three treaties that stipulate the Philippines territory, the first, the 1898 Treaty of Paris, the second, in 1900 Treaty of Washington, and the third, in 1930, that's the UK Treaty, all regulated the Philippines' western boundary line at 118 degrees east longitude. Areas in the west of the 118 degrees east longitude do not belong to the Philippines, but the Nansha Islands claimed now by the Philippines and Hwangyan Island are all in the west of the 118 degrees longitude. Nansha are the Spratlys, Hwangyan, Scarborough. Let's go back. If you look at the lines, Scarborough is outside, of course the Spratlys are outside. Ergo, Wang Yi is saying, your own treaties show you don't own these features. How do we answer that? We go to the second treaty, 1900, that's the Treaty of Washington. When the Americans came here in 1898, they found out that there were many islands outside of the treaty lines. Scarborough Shoal, islands in the Batanes, in Sulu, you have Cagayan, Sibuto, many islands. So the Americans asked the Spaniards, why don't we make another treaty to include all of these islands that we missed? Of course, the Spaniards said, you have to pay. So Americans paid again $100,000 US on top of the $20 million US that they paid for the Treaty of Paris. So the new Treaty of Washington 2 years later, Spain clarified that it had relinquished to the US all title and claim of title which Spain may have had at the time of the conclusion of the Treaty of Paris to any and all islands belonging to the Philippine archipelago lying outside the lines. All other islands that Spain had title or claim of title, kasama na, we will cede it to you for an additional $100,000. So, in effect, Spain ceded to the U.S. all territories to which Spain had title or claim of title lying outside the lines of the Treaty of Paris. This includes Scarborough Shoal and the Spratlys. But the Americans dropped the Spratlys. We can revive it for purposes of public knowledge that we had an earlier claim, earlier than anyone. Now, in 1938, we had a Commonwealth government run by Filipinos, and the people, government officials at the time had a good foresight. They were very far-sighted. They were afraid that another country might claim Scarborough Shoal. So they proposed to the American government that the Commonwealth will put up a lighthouse to assert its sovereignty. And so they wrote the Secretary of War if they can put up a lighthouse. Of course, the issue was whether Scarborough Shoal is part of the Philippines. And the Secretary of War went to Secretary Colonel the Secretary of State, and he wrote this memorandum, Secretary Colonel Hull, 1938 memo. Because of the absence of other claims, the shoal should be regarded as included among the islands ceded to the U.S. by the American-Spanish Treaty of November 7, 1900. That's the Treaty of Washington, 1900. In the absence of evidence of a superior claim to Scarborough Shoal by any other government, the Department of State would interpose no objection to the proposal of the Commonwealth government to study the possibilities of the shoal as an aid to air and ocean navigation. There you are, an official document of the U.S. saying Scarborough Shoal is Philippine territory. But of course, in 2012, When China seized Scarborough Shoal, the US said, "We do not take sides in territorial disputes in the South China Sea." Well, it's difficult for a US president to send young Americans to die on the shoals of Scarborough Shoal, on those rocks. So, but that's it. Historically, that's included in the maps of the US. They have official document. It's part of the Treaty of Washington. It's all there. Now, see, we are engaged in this battle with China now. The Chinese Society of Law, that's June 2, came out with a statement, given the fact that China and the Philippines have opposite coasts, the distance between which is less than 400 nautical miles, an overlap exists between their 200 nautical mile EEZ, and therefore there are overlapping EEZs. It's outside the jurisdiction of the UNCLOS Tribunal because there's an overlap. Is the distance really just 400 nautical miles? This is China. You measure 200 nautical miles from its coastline, it's here. You measure 200 nautical miles from our coastline, there is no overlap. Very far. There will be an overlap if China, the boundary of China are the 9 dashed lines, and that will be the overlap. So in the DNA of these Chinese lawyers, they automatically take it for granted that they own the South China Sea, therefore there is an overlap. You see, all the Chinese generals, admirals, Politburo members, bureaucrats, they've been taught from grade school to college, they own the South China Sea under the 9 dash lines. You cannot talk to them now. From 1995 to 2012, we have been talking to them about mischief reef. Why are you taking mischief reef? But they always say we have indisputable sovereignty. It's in their DNA that they own the South China Sea. So when they seized Scarborough Shoal in 2012, we said we have to do something different. We cannot talk to them for the next 17 years again. And they will keep on saying that we own the South China Sea. That's why we went to the tribunal. Is it correct that they own the South China Sea under international law? We have to introduce a new element. Otherwise, we will be banging our heads against the wall. That's why we need that ruling. I will not go into this. We're running out of time. This one you might be interested. You see, okay, I will explain it. In the position paper of China, China raised two basic fundamental issues. The China is saying this is a territorial sovereignty issue and therefore outside the scope of UNCLOS. And this is also a maritime delimitation issue, and China has excluded itself from compulsory arbitration in case of maritime delimitation. So two. So we had all our arguments at The Hague, and the ruling came out October 29. And the ruling states, this is not a dispute concerning sovereignty or maritime boundary delimitation. Bang. Their two basic fundamental objections just fell apart. And in the southern sector, we divided the West Philippines into two, the southern sector, Palawan side, and the northern sector, Luzon side. And in the southern sector, the tribunal said, we reserved decision on our jurisdiction on the southern sector because we want to go to the merits of the claim of the Philippines because they will have to present evidence that Ito-Aba does not generate an EEZ. Ito-Aba is not capable of human habitation. So on the southern sector, the tribunal said, wait a minute, let's go, before we say we have jurisdiction, we will hear your side first, we will see your evidence that none of those features in the Spratlys is capable of human habitation. But so this is it. On the northern sector, there is no dispute. Because in the northern sector, the tribunal said, given that Scarborough Shoal lies over 200 nautical miles from any maritime feature claimed by any state to generate an EEZ or continental shelf, there is no need to delimit anything. We can determine the status of Scarborough Shoal. In other words, Scarborough Shoal is here. There is no island of China or any other state that will overlap, that will claim an EEZ here. So there are no overlapping zones. So this is totally free. We have jurisdiction over this area. But over this area, there could be an overlap. If Ituaba generates an EEZ capable of human habitation, this is the overlap. So this area, we're home free already. It's huge. Reed Bank is here. There is no dispute over Reed Bank, jurisdictional dispute. So if the tribunal rules that we have an EEZ up to here, we can now exploit this because the 200 nautical mile EEZ of Ituaba reaches only along the fringes of Reed Bank. Now, so we have been asking all our friends and allies that the arbitration is a peaceful settlement of dispute. It is the way to go. And the parties to the arbitration, China and the Philippines, because China is still considered a party under UNCLOS, must abide by the ruling of the tribunal. We want all our friends and allies to make those statements, and they are making those statements. G7 conference in Japan last May 2016, they said, we reaffirm the importance of states making and clarifying their claims based on international law, seeking to settle disputes by peaceful means, including through juridical procedures, including arbitration. Prime Minister Cameron said, we want to encourage everyone to abide by these adjudications. G7 Foreign Ministers Conference, the parties to the arbitration must fully implement any decision rendered by the relevant courts and tribunals which are binding on them, including as provided under UNCLOS. The European Union, through its High Representative, said all concerned parties must abide by the legally binding ruling of the tribunal. ASEAN Foreign Minister's statement in Laos, parties must give full respect for the legal and diplomatic process. This is the code word for abide by the ruling. You see, ASEAN is very careful in its wording. ASEAN-US Summit in Sunnyland, the same. Abide by, give full respect for legal and diplomatic processes. The EU Parliament last December issued this statement. Calls on all the parties, including China, to respect the eventual decision of UNCLOS. The G7 last year said the parties must fully implement any decisions rendered by the relevant courts and tribunals which are binding on them. So we have convinced the world to support us that arbitration is the way to go. So you can just imagine if the new government will say, we will not continue with the arbitration. Well, President-elect Duterte has already said, we will wait for the ruling of the tribunal and we will respond accordingly based on that ruling. And the incoming DFA Secretary, Yasay, also said that. We will wait for the ruling. So we are assured there will be no moves on bilateral talks or anything until the ruling comes out from their own statements, a statement of the President-elect and the DFA, incoming DFA. About China, what is the position of China? China says there are 40 countries supporting us on our position that the dispute should be resolved only through bilateral talks. Some of these countries are Mauritania, Venezuela, Gambia, Togo, Kenya, Sierra Leone, and landlocked countries like Nigeria, Burundi, and Afghanistan. All of these have no relation to the South China Sea. No historical link at all. Fiji, Slovenia, and Cambodia. China claimed that they have adopted the Chinese position, but all these countries disowned it. So I'm back to my last slide. We are engaged in a historic battle to defend over 531 square kilometers of our maritime space, larger than our total land area. This maritime space is part of Philippine national territory. Why? The Constitution says national territory includes the seabed, subsoil, and other submarine areas over which the Philippines has sovereignty or jurisdiction, or under Article 56 of UNCLOS, the Philippines has jurisdiction with regard to the establishment and use of artificial islands, installation structures, marine scientific research, protection and preservation of the marine environment, other rights provided in the convention. Within this huge maritime space, we have all these rights under our jurisdiction. So domestic law considers our maritime zones, EEZ and extended economic shelf, as part of national territory. International law considers only our territorial space, but there are two different planes. And our Constitution prevails over international law when we decide a domestic issue. So all government officials are bound by this. The maritime zones, that big area in dispute now, is part of national territory as far as the Philippines is concerned. We have to preserve that for the Philippines. That ends my presentation. Thank you for your kind attention.
Thank you very much, Justice Carpio, for such an awesome and very informative lecture. We feel that all the attendees and stakeholders appreciate the comprehensive lecture that Justice Carpio has just presented. We hope that media and the public, to include the youth here in attendance in this hall, have been properly informed of the latest in our issues on the South China Sea and West Philippine Sea that may affect our future. So next in our activities would be the open forum. So may we request all panelists and moderators to come up the stage to be able to respond to questions from the audience. The chairman and the CEO of Trident Defense, Captain Rod Mejia, and of course the president and COO, Attorney Toby Purisima, are on stage with our panelists, Justice Carpio and our very own Senator Enrile, sir. We're now open to receive any questions from the audience. So who would like to ask the first question? Please approach the microphone, please.
Good afternoon, Justice Carpio, and good afternoon, Honorable Senator Enrile. My name is Lugan Alipio, and I am a judicial reform advocate, and you can say West Philippine Sea advocate as well. So before my question, I'd like to quote the 1987 Constitution mandates, quote, "The state shall protect the nation's maritime wealth in its exclusive economic zone and reserve," and I repeat, reserve its use and enjoyment exclusively, I repeat, exclusively, to Filipino citizens. So my question is, should the arbitral tribunal decides that the 9-dash line is illegal and we get to keep 80% of our exclusive economic zone, will the incoming President Duterte commit culpable violation of the Constitution if he agrees to a joint exploration with China, specifically revenue sharing? What if our Chinese friends, just like in Binondo, insist 70% would go to them and 30% would go to us? Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to answer that in detail, but that issue is pending before the Supreme Court right now. There's an issue of what is the meaning of the state shall protect its marine wealth in the EEZ. Does marine wealth mean only the fish, the living organisms, or does it include oil and gas and mineral resources? Because if it includes everything, then foreign companies cannot explore because it says exclusive use. But that's an issue now. But we don't have to go into that because China is saying before you can, China's invited all countries into a joint development over the disputed waters, but no takers at all. Vietnam, Malaysia. Why? Because China has one precondition, that you concede sovereignty to China, and China is willing to share the revenue with them, with you. So if we concede sovereignty to China over a reed bank, then we can explore. We will give China 50, we get the 50. Of course, we cannot do that. No country has accepted that offer. Thank you.
Thank you. And my next question, if I may, is to Senator Enrile. You advance the AFP modernization law. You even requested a bigger budget allocation for the AFP. So what do you think? Why don't we have a unified foreign policy? We don't have a credible defense system. So why do you think is the reason behind that?
So, what's the second part of your question?
Yeah. Why is it that we don't have a unified foreign policy?
Why don't we have a unified
Foreign policy. It keeps on changing every administration.
Well, I do not know whether we have a foreign policy
At all.
in connection with our neighbors in Asia, a regional foreign policy. But I think this country ought to prepare for the future by strengthening its military capability to contribute to any effort to maintain order in the West Philippine Sea. Because right now, the good justice has informed us of the problem we have in this country and the laws that the rules or the legal rules we are using to assert our claim. But assuming for the sake of argument that we will win that case, and I don't think in my mind right now that we will lose it, given the lucid and very extensive and comprehensive presentation of the good justice, the problems will still remain whether the decision of the International Tribunal could be enforced. And as we know, among nations, unlike among citizens of a country, there is no government, no policeman. And its country will have to fend for itself primarily or call for the assistance of its friends or allies in order to assert its rights and claims over issues pertaining to its sovereignty over a certain space of the planet.
Thank you for answering my question.
Next question, please. Yes, sir.
Good afternoon. My name is Attorney Paul Yusi. I'm a member of the ASIS. I have several questions, sir. It can either be answered by Justice Carpio or our Honorable Senator Enrile. It is possible that, according to newspaper accounts, that the decision might be out by July 7 after the inauguration of the new president. The worry now is in respect to enforcement of any decision that may be favorable to the Philippines. On the assumption that there is a decision favorable to the Philippines, recognizing our position, what would be the rules, whether international or otherwise, that would be sufficient to enforce the arbitral award? Because I come across the New York Convention of 1959 respecting enforcement of foreign arbitral award. Does the enforcement fall under the UN Convention of 1959? Second, assuming that yes, What if the executive department decides not to enforce it, despite the fact that there is a procedure in the enforcement of the award, and later on agrees to, or even explores the possibility of engaging into a joint exploration? Would that agreement be on the executive level only, or should that be in the context of a treaty to be approved by the Senate? And if so, either an executive agreement or a treaty to be approved by the Senate, would that be the basis to the effect that we have, to a certain extent, given up whatever gains that we had in that decision? Thank you.
On your first question, how to enforce a favorable ruling, there is no world policeman to enforce the ruling of the tribunal. Unlike in the ICJ, International Court of Justice, the ruling of the International Court of Justice under the UN system will be enforced by the Security Council. But of course, if one of the adverse parties has a veto power, you cannot enforce it because that party will just veto any resolution. But in the case of UNCLOS, there is no world policeman, and that convention, UNCLOS convention, says the parties undertake to abide by the ruling. They themselves will abide by the ruling. But of course, China said, we will ignore any ruling. So what do we do? The ruling, if the ruling strikes down the 9 dash lines, it means that there are high seas in the South China Sea. The South China Sea is not Chinese national territory. There are exclusive economic zones, Vietnam, the Philippines, Malaysia, Brunei, and Indonesia. And in the exclusive economic zones, as well as in the high seas, there is freedom of navigation and overflight. So, with that ruling, the Americans, they have already said it, they're conducting it now, will conduct freedom of navigation operations. In the Shangri-La dialogue, early this June, the French defense minister said, we will also sail our warships in the South China Sea because we cannot allow one state to claim an entire sea because someone might claim the Arctic Ocean or the Mediterranean Sea. So, and the defense minister of France said, we will ask our European neighbors to do the same. So the naval powers, because they have an interest in freedom of navigation and overflight, they will enforce that part of the decision. They will sail. China says, no, this is Chinese national territory, they cannot, because the naval powers will waive the ruling of the tribunal. These are high seas. Anybody can sail here. These are EEZs of the Philippines, Vietnam, and Malaysia. We will sail through that because international law allows us to sail in the exclusive economic zones without permission from anyone. So as far as freedom of navigation and overflight is concerned, the naval powers themselves will enforce that. They already announced it. But on the dispute over who can exploit the oil, fish, and gas, that is our battle with China. We assume that battle ourselves. Nobody will fight that battle for us. So, what do we do? Well, with the ruling, we go to the United Nations General Assembly, sponsor a resolution that China must abide by the ruling, must comply with international law, must not be a rogue nation, must not be an outcast in the community of civilized nations. Exactly what Nicaragua did to the U.S. in Nicaragua versus the U.S. The U.S. placed mines in the waters of Nicaragua. Nicaragua sued the U.S. before the ICJ. The U.S. said, we don't recognize the ICJ, it has no jurisdiction. The ICJ said, we have jurisdiction. U.S., you violated the territorial integrity of Nicaragua. You paid damages, $30 million. The U.S. refused. Nicaragua went to the Security Council. The U.S. vetoed. It has a veto power. So Nicaragua went to the General Assembly, sponsored the resolution. The U.S. must comply with international law. As the #1 exponent of the rule of law, they must abide by the ruling of the ICJ. They must not be a rogue nation, etc. Voting, majority voted on the side of Nicaragua, but there was a large minority in favor of the U.S. The following year, Nicaragua introduced the same resolution, voting, less votes for the U.S. The following year again, Nicaragua introduced so on and so on, until the last voting, only one state voted for the U.S., Israel. It was a huge reputational cost to the U.S., and when President Chamorro was elected president of Nicaragua, she defeated the Sandinista candidate. The U.S. gave her country, Nicaragua, $500 million in economic aid. Chamorro promptly asked her parliament to repeal the law requiring the U.S. to pay the $30 million damages. That's how it ended. Eventually, there was compliance because it was a huge reputational cost to the U.S. It was not worth it. The recent one that happened, the Arctic Sunrise case, the crew of the Arctic Sunrise, a Greenpeace vessel, went to the Arctic, climbed an oil rig of Russia, the crew, and the Coast Guard of Russia arrested them, took the vessel and the crew to Russia, detained them. Netherlands, the flag state, sued before the ITLOS, Law of the Sea Tribunal. Russia said the tribunal has no jurisdiction. The tribunal said, we have jurisdiction. Russia released the crew, released the vessel. Russia said, no, we will not. But within 1 year, the Russian parliament passed a law authorizing Putin to pardon the crew and release the vessel, and that's what Putin did. He released the crew and the vessel. But Putin said, we are following national law, not international law. But as far as Netherlands was concerned, there was compliance. The vessel was released and the crew was released. So there is a study made by a Filipino lawyer. He was a senior lawyer in the Permanent Court of Arbitration in The Hague. His name is Aloysius Liamson. He made a survey of decisions of the ICJ and other international tribunals. Over 95% of decisions of tribunals and the ICJ were eventually complied with. It took time, but in the end, they were complied with. The losing state will always say, we will not comply, we will withdraw, but they end up complying because the cost of non-compliance will be higher than the cost of compliance. In our case, we will not be alone like Nicaragua because Vietnam will use the ruling, Malaysia will use the ruling, Brunei and Indonesia will use the ruling, and the naval powers will use the ruling. So we can go to the world, sponsor the same resolutions everywhere. In any international convention, we will use the ruling. It will be a huge reputational cost. But we have to persevere. This will not happen overnight. I call this an intergenerational struggle. We must first get a ruling. With that ruling, China's possession of the waters will never ripen into ownership because we have a ruling, as long as we keep on using the ruling. But we should have a long-term view of this dispute. That's all. Thank you.
Next question.
Maraming salamat po, Trident Defense, Mr. Mejia, Attorney Cruz, our esteemed expert and Justice, Antonio Carpio, and Senator Enrile. Thank you for your patriotic initiative here in this fine venue. I am Andy Moran, representing the Philippine Association of Law Schools in behalf of Attorney Tanya Lat, who has another function. And I'm also representing the heirs of the Sultanate of Sulu. Attorney Lat would like to direct her question to the organizers. She is very thankful for this opportunity, and she's wondering how the organizers were able to get her a personal email regarding this event. So that's my first question. The second question is directed to Justice Carpio and Senator Enrile. We would like to ask you if the Philippine government is aware of the Chinese academic sponsorships for Tausug experts regarding the pre-Islamic traditions of the Tausug peoples. Last April, during the Unity Covenant in Zamboanga, I was one of those invited to this Unity Covenant event, and the ongoing sponsorship was presented to us in the Royal Council. And it turns out that there have been tributes by esteemed members of the Tausug people to the Chinese emperor during the 11th century. And we are wondering how these papers, if they are presented and finalized in this court, if these papers will still be considered valid in the current international proceedings. Thank you.
Again, I am not familiar with the subject. And if we are going to talk about prehistoric data, well, I do not claim any knowledge about it, so I defer to render any comment or remarks or opinion about it.
Okay, basically you're asking what would be the ramification of the fact that the Sultan of Sulu went to China during the dynasty period and brought tributes. Is that what you're asking?
If my memory serves me right, based on the talks during the meeting, the sovereignty of the Sultanate of Sulu started in 1734, as per the advice of Governor Harrison back in 1947 to President Quirino. So during the 11th century, there were esteemed chieftains of the Tausug peoples during that time. And I think it is also recognized that during this time, China had the largest naval armada in the world. So it is possible that this Chinese armada, which stretched all the way from Formosa to India, may have passed through the waters occupied by the Tausug people during the time.
Well, we have to be accurate here. Based on historical record, Admiral Zheng He never visited the Philippines, and that's a fact. Although the Chinese claim that he came here and he named a Chinese governor general for the Philippines. Of course, there are no records for that. When Zheng He made that voyage, he visited the states. Let's say he went to Borneo, and upon reaching a land, he would give a gift to the ruling chieftain, to the king of that area. They would exchange gifts. He had this treasure ship full of gifts. It was their custom to give a gift whenever they visit another kingdom. Give it to the king. It does not mean vassalage. It does not mean you're giving tribute, because Zheng He brought gifts to all the kingdoms that he visited throughout his voyages. So when there is an exchange of gift, then they have trading. They trade. So it's like when the president of the Philippines visits the US president, he brings along a gift, a token. Before, you have to bring a valuable gift. But it doesn't mean that you subjugate yourself to that king. Because Zheng He himself gave gifts. So, what is the meaning of this gift when the Sultan, one of the chieftains in Sulu, went? It's just a token. Your recognition that you want friendship. Like when you visit a friend or you visit somebody who's notable, you bring something, a chocolate. It doesn't mean that you are giving your allegiance to that fellow. And at that time, right now, if you want to export to a country, that country will even tax you. It's like a tax. All these gifts, once you give the gift, then there is trading. There's a book written by by a professor in Singapore who belongs to the International Society of Admiral Zheng He, and he explained that all these gifts didn't mean that they were acknowledging, giving allegiance to the Emperor of China. In fact, hundreds of years before Zheng He made his famous voyage, Kublai Khan sent his emissaries to all of Southeast Asia, including Java. He was now the new emperor. He was the first emperor. And his emissaries invited all the kings to visit China or send tributes. And this Java king, he is the founder of the Majapahit Empire. He was offended. Why will I pay tribute, give tribute to Kublai Khan? So he cut the ears of the emissaries of Kublai Khan, sent them back. Of course, Kublai Khan was enraged. And he sent an expeditionary force of Mongols and Chinese to Java, 1,000 ships and about anywhere from 30 to 50,000 soldiers to punish this Java king. But the Java king defeated this expeditionary force. They had to flee Java. And that king founded the Majapahit Empire. What is the meaning of Majapahit Empire? Majapahit comes from the word pait. It's a bitter fruit. In Java, they call it Majapahit. It's like our pait. It's bitter. Maja means fruit, pait means bitter. It's an Austronesian-derived word. So we have to be careful whenever we mention Admiral Zheng He, because first, he never visited the Philippines. Second, he himself gave tributes to the kings that he visited. But it doesn't mean that he gave allegiance to these kings. It's an act of friendship, and after that, you can trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much po. Actually, I'll just include one point because I've been coordinating with the National Historical Commission and they are lacking some records regarding the Sultanate. So I've been the one personally looking into this in behalf of Tita Lidy Rasul Taniedo, who sends her regards, former labor attaché po.
Yeah,
So-
I'll tell you
so thank
something.
you very much.
Because our Sultan went to China, and of course he died there, they built a tomb there, his descendants are still there. There is a Chinese map claiming all the waters between China and Sulu, just because of that single trip. So be careful, because China will claim all the waters all the waters between China and Sulu.
Our professors from UP system and some attorneys from NCMF relayed this to us. So I'm sure they are exerting due diligence regarding this. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can we move on to next question, please? Please go ahead.
This question is directed to Justice Carpio. Sir, just if I may refer to the map that was earlier showed, where we are approaching the West Philippine Sea in terms of two sectors. So now we're looking at the northern sector, and there we see Scarborough. And so my understanding is that even if, for example, under the best scenario, the tribunal would rule that there are no overlapping EEZs in the northern sector, then that means that we would be able to secure our exclusive rights, exploration rights when it comes to oil and gas. However, this would leave open the question of fishing rights because, this would leave open the question of sovereignty over the shoal itself and of course, sovereignty over the territorial sea, the 12 nautical miles around Scarborough Shoal, because the tribunal would not be able to rule on that. So my question is, even if we would be able to secure our exploration rights over oil and gas, with respect to our fishermen, who usually are not fishing offshore, but closer to the shore, and therefore closer to the shoal, possibly within the 12 nautical miles from Scarborough, what kind of arrangements perhaps can we secure even under the best case scenario from the tribunal ruling, so that we will be able to ensure that they can safely fish within 12 nautical miles from Scarborough. Again, assuming that, of course, the tribunal will not be able to decide on sovereignty. Sir, and just a follow-up question also related to fishing rights. This question actually is based on the fact that I am not sure whether in the case that we filed, whether in the arbitration case that we filed, whether we invoked and established traditional fishing rights over Scarborough, or whether our submission was limited to questioning China's law enforcement measures, which we say are violative of our traditional fishing rights. So did we establish traditional fishing rights, sir, or did we just question the measures? Just two questions. Thank you, sir.
Well, you're correct. In the northern sector, there are no overlapping areas, so we will have a full EEZ except for Scarborough Shoal, because that's a territorial issue. You draw 12 nautical miles around that, that's the whole. The decision will not cover the waters within 12 nautical miles. But we have raised the issue that Filipinos have been fishing since time immemorial in the territorial waters of Scarborough Shoal. And our position is that whoever owns it, America may own it, Russia may own it, but we have traditional fishing rights there in the territorial sea. In the exclusive economic zone, there are no traditional fishing rights because that has been excluded. All historic rights have been extinguished. But in the territorial sea, there has been no extinguishment of traditional fishing rights. So we're saying, even if that's owned by China, for the sake of argument, we're not conceding, we can still fish there. Assuming we win that argument, then the tribunal will say, we're not deciding who owns Scarborough Shoal, but Filipino fishermen have been fishing there since time immemorial. They can continue fishing there together with other countries, fishermen from other countries. That will be the ruling. But if we send our fishermen there and they're water cannoned by the Chinese, that's the big problem. We either send our Coast Guard or we just tell our fishermen, wait another time, we will just subsidize your expenses. If you go to Scarborough Shoal, in one day, you can fill your bangka with fish. If you go outside, it will take you 10 days. We will pay you the fuel for 10 days. We have to help them in the meantime. That's all. Thank you.
We forgot to get your name, madam, in your organization.
My name is Johaira, but I work in government, but I'm attending in my personal capacity.
Thank you. Any other questions, please? From the diplomatic community, any questions? Sirs? There at the back, please, sir.
Thank you. I'm Anders Kaur from Core Analytics. I was lucky enough to accompany Kalian Atenito to Scarborough Shoal on June 12th. I'm also writing a book, or I'm editing a series of volumes, 6 volumes on the South China Sea with 53 authors around the world. I have 2 questions. In terms of the Sierra Madre and the concrete and steel that can't be brought out there because of the blockade by the Chinese, has the U.S. been approached and asked, can you help us get steel and concrete out to that location? It seems like we should. I'm from the U.S. It seems like we should be helping more in that respect. The other question is, you had mentioned that the Chinese demand for joint development is an initial demand to cede sovereignty. Malaysia and Brunei are, in fact, developing oil and gas in their regions. Does that mean that they have likely, at least privately, ceded sovereignty over that territory? And then, what can you give more detail on the the financial proposal that the Chinese are making? And are they asking for 50-50 revenue sharing, or is it 50-50 profit sharing? Are they asking countries to release or sell their oil and gas to China at cheaper than market value as a way to be compensated for the right to develop your own EEZ? Thank you.
Okay, I got your two questions. I didn't get the third one, but anyway, you tell me what the other question is. On BRP Sierra Madre, we are using small crafts to bring in iron bars, cement. So we have slowly reinforced the superstructure. I think it will last for a few more years. So we're okay with that. But then there is that mischief-free air and naval base of China will be, which is a more imminent threat to Sierra Madre. On your other question on joint development, we have not reached the point on what will be the sharing because we refuse to discuss that matter because we cannot accept the sovereignty of China. So we have not reached that point. But take for example Shell. In Malampaya, Shell is the company that's lifting the gas. That company is 90% foreign owned. The company that lifts the gas can be 100% foreign owned. We don't have a problem as long as it's done under international law, under Philippine law rather. As long as the exploration and utilization, exploitation is under Philippine law, it can be, the company can be 100% foreign owned. Is there another question I did not answer?
Sorry. So, I mean, what I've heard is that the Chinese are requesting revenue sharing or profit sharing, and it's been unclear to me up to this point whether the 50-50 split or the 75-25% split that they've proposed to countries like Vietnam, Malaysia, and Brunei is revenue sharing or profit sharing, and how that split is happening between the normal profit sharing that might happen between Shell and a sovereign country and the what I would call abnormal type of profit sharing or revenue sharing that might happen, which includes an additional premium, an additional sovereignty premium that a country like Malaysia or Brunei might have to be forced to pay to China in order to be able to develop their own EEZ.
Yes, in the Malampaya area, it's done under Philippine law. It's 60-40 in favor of the Philippines, but there's nothing that will prevent us from having a 50-50 as long as it's done under Philippine law.
Any questions from our representatives from government? The military, it's now your chance to ask the question. From the academe, from the youth, questions? Any more? Yes, please. State your name, please.
Good afternoon. My name is Joy. I'm part of the group of Kalayaan Atin Ito. We just came from Scarborough. Sorry. Oh, sorry.
Sorry for being emotional about this. Yes. To Justice Carpio. You stated a while ago that it is in the DNA of the Chinese people that South China Sea and Scarborough belongs to them. And we, the group who just sailed there days ago, we can confirm that in their hearts and in their minds, no amount of explanation would dissuade them that Scarborough Shoal does not belong to China as far as they're concerned from infancy. And up to this day, they are guarding their own territory. They even refer to the lagoon as the lake. They call it the lake. When they drive us away, they told us, go back to Philippines, this is China. And you mentioned also a while ago that China has the capability, the Philippines does not have the capability. We are expecting the ruling on July 7, but we all know that China stated that they will not abide with any ruling. My question now to all the panelists, we all know that the United States did not ratify the UNCLOS. What should we do now as the most affected country in this issue? China will not abide with the ruling. They have the capability, we don't have the capability. What then should the 100 million Filipino do to protect our sovereignty, to protect our territory?
Okay, thank you for that question. As I said, the ruling, if it's in our favor, and I'm confident it will be in our favor, we'll have several parts. If the 9 dash lines are struck down, and we expect that to be stricken down, that means that there are high seas, as you can see in the map, and there are EEZs. The naval powers will now wave that to the Chinese. These are high seas. We will sail. You cannot stop us. These are EEZs, and under international law, we can sail in the EEZ of the Philippines, EEZ of Vietnam, even in your EEZ without your permission, because that's international law. They will be the ones to enforce that portion. So China will be fighting all the naval powers of the world. That portion of the decision will be enforced by the naval powers. As to whether we can fish in our EEZ, we can get the oil and gas, that is our problem. Let us say China will bring a gas platform to Reed Bank after the ruling. We cannot take it away. We don't have the military capability. And I don't think the Americans will help us remove that. What do we do? Now, China National Offshore Oil Company has assets in Canada, has assets in the US and in other countries. With the ruling of the tribunal saying that the gas in Reed Bank belongs to the Philippines, we can sue China Offshore Oil Company in Canada, which has ratified UNCLOS. And that ruling will say that gas belongs to the Philippines. Canadian court will honor that ruling, and we will ask the Canadian court to seize the assets of China Offshore Oil Company in Canada in payment for the gas that China National Offshore Company stole from us. We have a remedy, but we need a ruling. In the US is not a party to UNCLOS, but it has announced, and it's practicing it, that the EEZ is part of customary international law. Therefore, the gas there belongs also to the Philippines. We can also sue CNOOC in American courts if there are assets of CNOOC in the US. So there are many things we can do with the ruling. There are many things that we can be creative about this. But we need a ruling. And that's why we have to get that ruling. So we are not totally helpless here. We have to cultivate, strengthen our alliances with our friends, with the US and Japan and Australia, because they have the capability to sail across the South China Sea to enforce the ruling. We fight our own battle on the resources, but with the ruling we can do it. In the meantime, as the good senator said, we have to maintain a credible self-defense force, because there is no free lunch when it comes to self-defense. If you look at history, all countries that failed to maintain a credible self-defense force were erased from the map. Now, for the last 40 years, we have poured all our resources to stamping out the insurgency. We have two, communists and the Muslim secessionists. Now suddenly there's a threat from the outside and we have to reallocate some of the resources. But we have to. Vietnam has a smaller GDP than the Philippines, but it bought 6 kilo-class state-of-the-art submarines from Russia. It bought fighter jets, fighter bombers, bought anti-ship missiles. They know that once they lower their guard, they will become another province of China or a satellite. Before we said, oh, we don't care, China is so far away. But China moved its border close to us. So we have to think now of maintaining a credible self-defense force. That's the only way. I will show you an example. When the USSR collapsed, Ukraine was in possession of 1/3 of the nuclear arms of the USSR. It was a nuclear power. The US, Russia, and UK convinced Ukraine to give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for a guarantee, a written guarantee, that these three countries, Russia, US, UK, will guarantee the territorial integrity of Ukraine. So Ukraine gave up its nuclear weapons. And it was confident. It had a guarantee of the US, Russia, and UK. Who was the first country that invaded Ukraine and seized Crimea? Russia. What did the US do? UK do? They did not do anything. Because you have to maintain a credible self-defense force. Otherwise, you will be erased from the map. And that's what we have to inculcate in the minds of our people. We have to maintain a credible self-defense force. Thank you.
If I may add, I hope that the next administration of this country, and I say this because it was neglected by past administrations, we should improve our deterrent capability. First, by establishing a credible air force. When during the Marcos years, the Chinese government never attempted to build anything in the West Philippine Sea because we lengthened the airfield of Palawan, Puerto Princesa, and we deployed one squadron of fighter planes there, with a range covering Pagasa and the rest of our islands in the West Philippine Sea. That was gone after the EDSA Revolution of 1986. And that's why I have been advocating while I was active in the preparation of the budget, the last one especially, that the first service command that we should improve is the Air Force. Because once you have a problem out there, you deploy 2 fighter planes to loiter in the area and they can protect our interests. You know, a land-based Air Force is much easier to deploy against an enemy that comes to your nearby, to your country, using water as a means of intruding into your territory. And during the last budget hearing, I precisely told the conferees, the bicameral conferees on the budget, the Senate panel and the House of Representatives panel, that we should allocate more resources for the Air Force. And I did provide an amount which they did not accept. And I told them, what good will all of this infrastructures and all these development, economic development programs that you are going to provide for if you cannot secure them? This is the basic issue, and I hope that the next president will attend to this problem. I've been calling the attention of the government for almost 2 terms now, 12 years, about this problem. But they talk about military modernization, they provide 9 billion pesos. What's that? Instead of providing 9 billion, divert the CC, the conditional cash transfer to protect your country and your people. Thank you, Mr. Justice.
Thank you, Senator. Questions more? Any more, please? Please approach the mic. State your name and your organization.
First of all, I would like to thank Lucia De Pelio, my good friend of mine, for inviting me here. And I'm Daniel Ivan R. Nepales from representing the youth. First, I would like to say that what is this air base for? If this generation doesn't want to live the age of war no more, why not instead build the Disneyland? Like how ironic it is to that God made everything and the rest was made by China. And the worst scenarios that our generation can think of is zombie apocalypse, aliens invading our planet, or massive destruction of wrath of nature. But to cut it short, my main question is, since this is a never-ending argument, I've been hearing until then and up until now, this is a problem. How will the next generation be interested or gain knowledge regarding this solution? Because I see that it's the best advanced solution is to educate or for us to be aware, so that when our time comes, we no longer need to argue about this, so that we can all live in peace and harmony.
Who are you addressing the question to?
To anyone.
There is an urgent need for this country to review its strategic capability. Can no longer wait. China, as the good justice said, is preparing for itself a security umbrella that, according to one book that I have read, will constitute one fleet for the Western Pacific and another fleet for the Indian Ocean. They will constrict the Strait of Malacca and the Basi Channel and the Balintang Channel to prevent the American intrusion into the western part of the Pacific area. And I think their program is about a decade or more, or a little bit over that period. We, in the Philippines, we have not done anything. What is being done today as a modernization is a hand-me-down process from the United States. We cannot depend on the United States. They cannot do the patrolling for our people around our perimeter, our border areas. We have to do that ourselves in order to protect precisely the livelihood of our people, especially the fishermen.
Did that answer your question? Any follow-up?
You know, The young people of this country must wake up and use your numbers to make your leaders move. Because this century is not going to be a very peaceful century for you. You're going to see more chaos from here on. There will be a remapping that will go on in Europe, in the Middle East, even in Asia. It will be your generation that will suffer unless you pressure your current leaders to do their job. Okay?
Thank you.
The problem is not, you have seen the presentation of the good justice. He defined the problem, he showed us the behavior of a hegemon in this area of the region, or in this region of ours. And unless we wake up to that fact and prepare for it, and be determined to face it, it's not far-fetched that we will be occupied by China. I'm warning your generation for this possibility.
If I may just, yes, if I may just add, no, I just want to emphasize the human aspect. Let's use the word propaganda. Obviously, it's been ingrained in generations of Chinese, as we heard in the lecture, that the South China Sea, the South Sea, is theirs. So we should do the same thing. In the words of the youth, in youth speak, we should make this viral. This lecture, our position, this is let's make it clear that this is a war of values, and this is a call to reflection. Reflection for us as a nation, what values are important to us, what are we willing to compromise, or are we willing to compromise anything in relation to this issue? It should be an easy question to answer. No compromises, of course, and we should emphasize this. Now, to the youth, as a member of the youth sector, we should emphasize and we should use the tools available to us in order to make a difference. We have social media. We saw the effect of social media, whether good or bad, during the previous elections. Now, the challenge is for us, as the good senator stated, that we will have a big problem if we don't do anything about this, or if we just use the tools that we have for lesser purposes, for entertainment, for simple joys. But there is a greater calling, in fact, a duty on our part to make a difference and to use the tools available to us in order to make a difference regarding this issue. We have students here, we have high school students here. They'll be part of the workforce in a few years. They'll be in positions of influence in a couple of decades. These are the people who will carry on this fight, no? And I'm also part of, I would like to think I'm also part of that generation. So it's a call on our part to make a difference. Now, if we don't make this part of our DNA as a people, as the youth sector, then the lectures and the thoughts and the sentiments that we've heard here will just stay inside this hall. No? So that shouldn't be the case. So it's a call to reflection in the sense that we should know our values and we should know that we should not compromise on these values and that we should carry on the struggle. And the next time we log on social media, we use our phones, our smartphones, for every perhaps 10 Instagrams that we send of what? Food, nice places, we should send 1, 2, or even 10 even to propagate and perpetuate this cause. And that's my call to everyone. And that's why this is the second year that we've called on you to attend this symposium on this topic, and also in order for us to educate everyone else. And we will be propagating this, and we will be spreading this, and we'll be giving copies of these lectures. No? So again, it's a call to reflect on our values. So we talk of, and extending it to the implementation phase, for example, we have this thing called whole of government approach for us, and we know that. Now it's time, perhaps, as we anticipate the ruling of the tribunal, perhaps we should have a whole of world approach to convince our allies and even to convince China. Again, the costs against itself, against China, is very big. And I think with a little convincing, we'll be able to get the most out of the decision. But again, I emphasize this particularly to the youth. Thank you.
Mr. Justice, may I just add this? You know, why I am an advocate of military preparedness? Because these events going on, the activities going on in the West Philippine Sea by the Chinese is not only for economic purposes. It is more for projection of their military capability. They cannot operate from Hainan against us. They want to control the South China Sea. Why? Because the future of this planet in this century will be a competition for resources and markets, and the possibility that the United States might withdraw from the world scene and leave the world alone to itself. And that is, all of these are parts of that, of this preparation of other countries, and we are not studying our own condition in relation to the events that are happening in other countries, especially in our region. They are increasing their reach around and control resources because they do not have it. Now, the only one who can stop them, not us. We do not have the capability. But nevertheless, we have to prepare to deter them if they should come into our shores. Even that we're not doing. Right now, the only umbrella, security umbrella we have is the Mutual Defense Treaty. But the Americans are not going to fight for us. We have to fight for ourselves. If they're active in the West Philippine Sea, it's not because of us. It's because of their commitments under the Bretton Woods Agreement. The strategic world plan that they adopted after World War II. Once they recede from the international scene, who is the policeman? Who will maintain international order? Nobody. It will be a free-for-all. In a free-for-all condition, with this kind of lackadaisical preparation that's being done over the last several administrations after Marcos, what do we have? That's why we are crying here. We are raising all kinds of problems, of issues here because of the abandonment, the neglect that we went through over time. The sooner we wake up, the better for us. And your generation should wake up the leaders of this country. I cannot do it for you because I'm going out of politics already, but I will still voice my concern if I have the time and the occasion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator. Any other questions? Yes, Captain Mejia, sir.
Okay, going back to your questions. As a Filipino citizen, it's our duty to, each and every one of us, are warrior. So we must prepare for the battle that may soon take place. So the way I see it is as it was mentioned by Justice Carpio and Senator Enrile, we must prepare. We should prepare a credible defense force. So each and every one of us should prepare, and also we have to prepare. Also, we have to strengthen also our reserve force. I'm a captain in the Navy in the reserve force. I'm the commander in Palawan. What we are doing right now is we are trying to strengthen our reserve force from Balabac to the part of Coron in Palawan, from the southern part to the northern part, because that's the battlefield that we're going to tackle in the next years to come. So, as a citizen of this country, we have to awaken our youth, prepare ourselves. We must disseminate information to each and every one of able bodies. So we should start this from the elementary until college. Also, we have to mention that we have also secret warriors. We need secret warriors. We can do this as a citizens or cyber warfare. You can do this as a citizen. We have also, right now, we have to strengthen also our Air Force as well as our naval forces, especially that the Philippines is a maritime nation. We are an archipelagic nation, so we have to strengthen our Navy as well as the Air Force. That's our first line of defense. And second are the reserves also. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before we end our open forum, I've been reserving these questions for the panelists. Being part of the reserve force ourselves, I'm a martial law baby, and I've seen the difference in the situations back then and now. And I would like to ask the good senator, sir, who has been our defense secretary and minister, if you would compare our reserve force management now as during your times, sir, would you say that we are better off before then than now?
I do not know that we have a reserve force now, because I think we stopped our program for that purpose. So we have to begin again. I don't think we have been doing the preparation, as I said, like what we did before the onset of the last war that involved our country. We had to train our 20-year-olds in order to prepare them for an eventuality that we never thought will happen. And it happened. And at least we were prepared. Our young 20-year-olds were prepared to fight for the country. Now, what do we have? Do we have a mobilizable force at any given time? And even if we have a ground force, what is the air cover that we have? What are the armors that we will employ in case of a real combat? What platforms do we have to secure our shores? We do not have. These are all given to us by the United States, but all of these were gone, except a few ones that are coming, given to us again. We should, on our own, set aside a portion of our 3 trillion budget, 3 trillion pesos, for defense. But what did we do? We have a constitution that imposes limitation on many of these things. Anyway, we cannot do much because that's what happened after EDSA Revolution one. So maybe the next president will try to do something else.
Thank you very much, Mr. Senator. Justice?
Excuse me, sir. Sorry. Am I allowed to ask just one final question? Just one. Yeah.
Okay,
I'm asking it for a friend. My friend is just wondering, since Senator Enrile is an advocate of modernizing our defense system, my friend is asking, how does a federal or a federalism setup of government will it help modernizing our AFP or not? What's the effect of a federalism type of government?
Well, whether you have a unitary system like we have now, or we turn into a federal system, the fact remains that we, as a nation, we have to prepare for our defense. When you talk of federalism, you're just talking about the structure of the government. But the need for security is still there for the nation, not for the component states. Because the responsibility for the security of the country will be left to the responsibility of the federal government if we federalize.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. One more? Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Rodante Marcoleta. I'm an incoming member of the 17th Congress of the Philippines. I would like to ask this question to Justice Carpio. We're facing the hardest realities of our times, more particularly the West Philippine Sea. But it seems that we have very minimum options to deal with these hard realities. We have this alliance with the United States. We have this mutual defense treaty, and no less than the President of the United States telling us that we have an ironclad arrangement. But that is yet to be tested. I think the treaty can only be tested during the times of war. But we're talking of our economic interest in this part of the world. You made mention about Ukraine as an example. I think for curiosity, can we explore that? Ukraine, you said, gave up something so that it can attract sovereign countries surrounding it to give that guarantee to that country after the dissolution of the USSR. Justice Carpio, what do you think we should give up as a nation so that we can attract our friends like the United States and probably Japan or Australia to give us that guarantee, not by way of a treaty that is yet to be tested, a kind of guarantee like Ukraine, so that we can take the future with all confidence, without this threat. That's number one. Number two, given the seriousness of the issues at hand, we thank you very much for this paper, the South China Sea, West Philippine Sea dispute, Justice Antonio T. Carpio. Would you agree, Justice Carpio, if we remove the label just down your paper, that the views expressed in this presentation are the personal opinion of the author? I don't think so. I think given the stature that you hold in the highest tribunal of our country, these are not personal opinion, I think they are expert opinion from a learned member of the Philippine Bar and the highest tribunal of this country. I don't think that the legislative department or even the executive department will unnecessarily disagree with the opinion that you expressed. Would you like that to be deleted, sir? Thank you very much.
Okay.
I will just say this apropos to your remarks. We must not depend upon the Mutual Defense Treaty. First of all, there's no binding commitment on the part of the United States to come to our succor immediately if there is a trigger event that will call for the application of the Mutual Defense Treaty, because under that treaty, even if there is an incident that is covered by that treaty, still it has to be approved by the Congress of the United States according to their constitutional processes. And that's why I am advocating for a rapid build-up of our military capability, not for offensive purposes, but only for deterrence, so that we can protect our people. And second, in the West Philippine Sea, unless the attack is on a Philippine vessel or a U.S. vessel or a Philippine aircraft or a U.S. aircraft, the Mutual Defense Treaty, according to the pronouncements of the Americans, will not apply. Because the islands that we occupy in the West Philippine Sea, according to the American authorities, are not covered by the treaty. Although we have always taken the position when we were discussing the problem of the bases with them and our security problem with the United States, that if our forces are attacked in Pagasa or in any of those islands, that should be covered, but they have not committed in favor of that proposition. So, who will then protect this country? Only us, only the Filipinos. And the government must accept this responsibility more than anything else.
I fully agree with the Senator, Justice Carpio, and I think that is also known by China. That is why I don't think China will attack us, because that will trigger the operation of the Mutual Defense Treaty. That is why I'm asking if, using the Ukraine example, if we can give up something, like giving up that provision in the Constitution that let us allow probably the United States to occupy or to maintain their bases in the Philippines, is something that we can give up. Will the Philippines be agreeable to this? Are we convenient with this? And can our people recognize this as a necessity in modern times? Thank you very much, sir.
Justice?
Yes, on the Ukraine experience, despite the written guarantee by Russia, the US, and UK, the written guarantee did not work because Russia itself invaded Ukraine and seized Crimea, and UK, US did not do anything to stop the invasion. So maybe Ukraine should not have given up its nuclear arms. That could be the lesson. I do not know how the Ukrainians feel about it. But my point is, when it comes to self-defense, you cannot outsource your self-defense to another country, especially if that other country is a big neighbor of yours. When Ukraine relied on Russia to be its defender, of course Russia can defend Ukraine against Poland or against any other country. But if Russia is the one that covets the territory of Ukraine, nobody will defend Ukraine. So the lesson here is you have to maintain your own credible self-defense force. We don't have to build up our defense forces in such a way as to defeat China in a war. We cannot never do that. But we can make it costly for China to encroach on our waters. That's exactly the strategy of Vietnam. Vietnam knows in an all-out war it will lose to China, but in a fight over the maritime zones with their submarines, they can sink the Chinese aircraft carrier. In other words, it will be costly, and that's enough deterrence. Now, on that sign, reservation there. I put that because in my talks, I often advocate positions that the government is not yet ready to take. Like, for example, I've been advocating that the Spratlys area should be declared an international maritime peace park, a maritime protected area. All countries claiming the Spratlys must suspend their territorial claims for the next 100 years and allow the Spratlys to be the nursery of the South China Sea, because that is where the fish spawn, and the eggs and larvae of fish that spawn there are carried by currents all the way to the coast of Vietnam, China, Luzon, Palawan, Indonesia, Sulu Sea, Malaysia. So everybody benefits if the Spratlys will remain as the nursery of the South China Sea. It has always been the nursery of the South China Sea. It's the most extensive reef formations in the South China Sea. So as a win-win situation for all countries, even after the ruling comes out, we can declare the Spratlys as a marine protected area. All the installations there in Pag-asa, in Mischief Reef, will be converted into marine research centers. Only Coast Guards can be stationed there, no Navy personnel, no, so that we can declare it a peace park. But of course, I'm talking ahead of our government, and I want to talk ahead of our government. That's why I have to put it there, because that's not the government position yet. But we have to explore areas like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think we have already run out of time. We would like to accept more questions, but it's already late. We would like to move on at this point to the presentation of token. Hence, we would like to call on the chairman of Trident Defense and the president of Trident Defense to present the token of appreciation to our panelists and to our guest of honor and speaker. Okay, at this point in time, may we call on the President and COO of Trident Defense, Attorney Toby Prisima, for the closing remarks.
Thank you again to everyone who has attended this event, the symposium. I know I'm the last man standing between everyone and the snacks, so I'll just thank everyone again for a fruitful day, for a fruitful afternoon. And again, this is a reminder to us, a call to reflection, and a war of values which we must respond to. So again, thank you everyone for attending, and please help yourselves to the snacks, and see you again next year.
Thank you, sir. Sir, bigay lang po kayo.